All right. Well, welcome to you all and to the Monday, December 14th meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you all are with us today. My apologies. We had some technical difficulties which caused our delay just now, but we are hopefully rolling and in good order. So let's go ahead and get started with our meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask our clerk to read the meeting notice that's required.
Yes, sir. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council are present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public may view the meeting at the live stream at www.fallschurchva.gov/council meetings and on FCC TV, Cox 11, RCN 2, and Verizon 35. Public comments will be accepted virtually from those who have signed up to speak via the meeting video platform. Public comments may also be sent to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. Thank you.
All right. Will you call roll, please?
I will. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right. Thank you very much. And if we could, let's all please rise wherever you might be and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to stand up right now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you very much for that. Let's move on to the receipt of public comments and council requests. And I guess the first item of business under that heading is the retirement board. Mr. Shields, is the retirement board with us this evening? Wyatt?
We're joined by the chair of the retirement board, Connie Rydberg, and our plan administrator is Cindy Mester. And Cindy, I don't know if you wanted to make a quick introductory comment and then turn it over to Ms. Rydberg.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Shields and Mayor. I'm honored that our chair of the retirement board is joining us this evening, and this is the annual report, which is required by city code, but also something that council is very invested in for all our boards and commissions. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rydberg for her report, and we'll both be available for questions. And this is a very busy and productive year for our retirement board. Thank you, Ms. Rydberg.
Sure, thank you, Cindy. And I'll say to you, thank you for having me here. Please do let me know if my internet connection goes in and out and I can adjust where I am. But again, thank you for having us here. My name is Connie Rydberg. I am the chair of the retirement board. As an introduction, my day job, I am a pension actuary during my day job. That means, and I oversee corporate pension plans. So I provide financial analysis for corporate pension plans. It's slightly different from oversight of a pension plan provided by a city, but many of the same comments. So I've been doing my day job as a pension actuary for 30 years and have been privileged to be on the retirement board for the City of Falls Church for about 10 years. Three retirement plans. We have two pension plans, the basic plan and the police plan. We also oversee what's called the OPEB plan, the other post-employment benefit plan, which is medical and life insurance benefits for retirees. So the basic plan covers city employees and school employees who are not eligible to participate in the Virginia Retirement System or VRS. That's generally part-time employees with the schools. The police plan covers the police department, and the OPEB, other post-employment benefits, covers city employees, school employees, and police. I have two sections to the report today. The first is focused on the financials of the retirement board, or plans, excuse me, and then there's a section about administration. So I'll start with the financial section, and in this first table, we have information about the assets of the plan, and between the three plans, we manage about $160 million worth of assets for the city. Our gross return ending June 30th of 2020 was 3.5% to 3.6%. And while that is less than our long-term assumption of around 7%, we were pleased with that result given where we were in March of this year. For our 5-year returns for the pension plans, a 5-year average return, gross return is 8.2%. For the OPEB plan is 6.5. So the 8.2, according to our investment consultants, is at the 92nd percentile, and the 6.5 is the 80th percentile. So we're pleased with both. The pension plans have slightly different investment strategies than the OPEB plan. They're different plans and different liabilities. The basic and police plan have a mix of passive and active investments, and also have real estate and infrastructure investments, whereas the OPEB is all passive or index funds and is only in stocks and bonds. This afternoon, I did look up how the Virginia retirement system had done for the last 5 years, and I was proud to see we compared very favorably. Their 5-year average for the same time period ending June 30th, 2020 was net of fees was 5.8%. So again, that compares very favorably, I would say, for our 8.2% for the 5 years. And we are very appreciative of our investment consultant who provides very good guidance to us. I do note that despite all those good results, the economic outlook for investments is certainly becoming more conservative, and lower returns are expected in the future. So while our current assumption, or was through June 30th, was 7%, we have reduced that down to 6.5% starting with this fiscal year. And that was based on the advice of both our outside actuary and our investment consultant. Moving down the page, the next section is the funded status of the plan provided to us by our outside actuary, Siegel Consulting. And I will focus on the the column labeled June 30th, 2020 funded status. So our basic and police plans are at 102 and 104% funded, both strong results, and our OPEB plan is funded at 2%. These funded status reflect both the change in the long-term outlook on the investments, and also we took some time this year to review our assumptions. So both our demographic assumptions, which is essentially retirement or retiree behavior assumptions. When do we think people are going to retire? What portion of the people do we think are going to elect medical coverage? So we updated those assumptions, as well as our economic assumptions. So those are baked into that updated funded status. And then the third section on the next page is regarding the water sale money that's in the pension plans. And as background, in 2015, proceeds from the sale of the water utility, $9.2 million was deposited in the pension plan. The intent here was to create an endowment. And so the city had the ability to take the investment earnings on that $9.2 million, use that to reduce the contributions that would otherwise be payable, use that savings for other projects. So we have a whole administration manual codifying how this all works. The maximum amount that the city can be allocated and can be used per year is $825,000. And the first few years, the city decided to defer and save up those earnings. In most recent years, the usage has been $640,000 per year. So that amount that
Chair,
city's-
you're dropping
city's
in
reserve
and out.
account.
Chair, you're dropping in and out. Sorry to interrupt,
Okay.
Chair. You're dropping in and out a tad. I wonder if maybe just dropping your video, although we like both, but maybe dropping the video will make your audio stay stable.
Okay. I will try that and let me know. Otherwise, I can try to move. I apologize.
It's nominal, but you're sharing good information.
All right. Thank you. So looking at the table, the initial balance that was deposited on July 1st, 2015, that principal amount was 9.2 million. 5 years later, that balance, the principal is at 9.3, but the amount in the city's reserve account is 2.5 million, and we moved that into a safe money market investment. So the total water sale assets in the pension plan as of the end of fiscal year 2020 is 11.8 million. Now, from the perspective of what has the city gotten the value from that investment, well, it's really three parts. It's the increase to the principal, so that's about a 1.1 million. The reserve account that can be used in future years is 2.5 million, and money that's been used by the city to offset otherwise required contributions has been 1.4 million through fiscal year 2020. So for a total 5-year value to the city of approximately 4 million, or about $800,000 per year. So we're proud, and as they say, past performance does not guarantee future experience, but we are very proud of that result. Moving on to the work plan activity. So this is the administration information. I'll go through this relatively quickly, but quarterly we review the investment returns and each manager, both with respect to performance and making sure our asset allocation is in line with where we want it to be. I mentioned this year we completed an experience study. We looked at the demographics or participant behavior assumptions, the economic assumptions, and updated those. Moving on down, we did take a look at the asset allocation. So this was provided to us by our investment consultant in March of 2020. And it was showed that we generally were where we wanted to be. There were certainly some tweaks that we could have undertaken, but just given the uncertainty, that meeting was shortly after all of the COVID shutdowns started happening, we chose to hold that off on any changes, and we'll review that again in a year or two when we all hope and pray that this COVID is behind us. Moving along, the investment policy statement, we review this periodically. We've had updates, that in general are codifying best practices. The retirement board recommends those, the city council approves them. We did have one update this June to the investment or the funding policy for the OPEB, and there is some additional administrative or best practice updates that is later in this meeting in the by consent section. We reviewed the city's policies around rehiring people who have started a pension, both to ensure compliance with IRS rules as well as to make sure that we didn't have a process in place that would allow someone to game a system, if you will. And so we've updated those processes. We did have one disability retirement case that we approved. I'm pleased to say that this is only the second disability retirement that I've reviewed in the 10 years. So I hope and pray, of course, that all the participants continue to be healthy. Moving on, we always look at our administrative expenses. This year we did a deep dive into the expenses that the plan pays to the city for the support of the plan. So the IRS rules allow that a plan can reimburse staff for the support that they provide. We did do a deep dive into looking at what that support is. And for 16 years, the plan had allocated $20,000 to the city for reimbursements. After that deep dive study, we upped that to $35,000 this year for FY22, I should say. Going on, we do review our service providers to make sure that we have good value for the fees that we provide. So we'll be looking at our record keeper and benefit payment, pension payment administration provider this year. We do also have a training policy, training requirements for the board that we are on target and on plan. And our plan administrator, Cindy Mester, provides us quarterly with a review of all the activities in the plan. The rest of the report is around roles and responsibilities, the members of the plan, and more details about the water sale money and details on how that works. And that is our report. Cindy Mester, is there anything that you'd like to add before we open it for questions?
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Chair, and be glad to answer questions in support of your responses.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that fine report and for you and your colleagues' expertise that you bring to bear on behalf of our city. We greatly appreciate it. And we hope that none of you will be retiring anytime soon from the retirement board. So we do have a couple of hands up. I'm going to go ahead and go to those right now. Our first one is Letty Hardy, followed by Mary Beth Conley. Letty?
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Ms. Rydberg, for volunteering your talents. I think we're very fortunate to have someone who does this for a living as well. Two quick things. One, I think last time we met with you, we had discussed something that was called the MCO, the minimum contribution override, if I'm remembering that correctly. And we had asked around benchmarking kind of where other jurisdictions were with that policy. Do you have an update on that?
Cindy, I'm going to turn that one to you.
Thank you. I was getting off mute. Thank you. Yes, that is something council did request at the June 15th work session, and we are continuing that process. So in the staff report that's on consent, you'll see on line 82 sort of where we are on some of those projects. That research for benchmarking other MCOs is in progress. Where we are right now is best practices based on our current consultant's recommendations.
Got it. And that'll be factored into the FY22 budget kind of process if there's impacts to that budget?
Yes, for FY22, the budget currently would be impacted by the valuation report that was just provided by Siegel Consulting and accepted by the retirement board at their November 19th meeting. But we will continue to look at those best practices, and staff will present that to the retirement board for consideration. And if a change would be made, it would come to council to be updated in your investment policy statement.
Great, thank you. And then the last thing, which should be really quick, is on page 5 of the staff report. Jason Whitstrom is listed as a member of this, and I feel like it's probably been a while since he's transitioned out of the city, so I don't know whether you need a new employee representative there.
Under our current plan, and because he's a participant in the retirement, whether he's currently employed or not, he was eligible to serve out his term, and he'll be up for renewal, and we'll see who nominates and who gets elected.
Oh, that's interesting. Cool. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
I will note, sorry, Ms. Hardy, that because he's still a member of the plan, I think that's part of the rationale for him still being on the board, that he does have a vested interest in his benefit.
Interesting.
My turn.
Yes, Vice Mayor Conley, please.
So, Ms. Rydberg, thank you for that presentation. I learned more about pensions and retirement from you than anybody else wherever I've been. So I appreciate every year when you give us this update. And one of the things when I first was on City Council that was so hard for me to understand was creating that investment by using the water sale fund. And it's so nice to see right there, yes, that we have a $2.5 million reserve to use in future years. And it's nice to see that this has worked out as was planned back in 2015. So thank you for shepherding that. You mentioned that we can only spend $825,000 per year of that money.
That's correct.
And is that because of policy that City Council wrote?
It is, yes. It was part of the policy when that was adopted.
So is it an amount, not a percentage?
It is a dollar amount, yes. It's
Okay.
both in the plan document and in the administration manual.
And that is, as Ms. Ryberg just mentioned, in the plan documents, so that was codified and adopted as a plan amendment. And it's $220,000 for police and $440,000 for basic as our current allocation. And then the 825 would be allocated also across basic and police.
Wait, 220,000 goes towards the police, comes from the police plan?
Yes,
And
under
440 from the other plan?
basic, and that's per your adopted budget because we're using 640,000. We're not using the full amount that's permitted under the plan in order to build a reserve, which is mentioned in line 26 chart, so that you can handle volatility and ups and downs like current economic downturns. There's a little cushion there.
So the current reserve is $2.5 million? We have that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then as far as the planning that we did, is that the amount of reserve we expected to have at this point, or is it more or less? Did we look at that?
Vice Mayor, this is Kiran, if I may address that question.
Yes, please.
So, the 2.5 million is the remaining portion after the 640 that we are using. We had some couple of very good investment results that we received in the years for our retirement earnings. So we have in our budget 640,000 on an annual basis that we use for our operating budget, and this 2.5 million is a separate bank. So the way it works is we can draw out up to 825 a year. We take 640 out, and that leaves a balance of 180. So that kind of collects, and we had some years where we have earned much more than 825, so it just goes and sits in the bank for the years when we would have less than, if we would have less than 640 in that year's earning, we can dip into this bank and make ourselves whole for the operation.
Okay, so if this year we actually need that extra $115,000, could we take it out of that 2.5? I mean, I know that will be a big discussion, but
we could.
If we're following
according
policy.
to the plan amendment that we have, we can draw as much as 825.
Okay.
So we and that should be okay with the retirement board.
Yeah, do we need special permission to do that?
Connie, you can speak to that, but I don't think at this point we need anything on the city side because we have the amendment in place.
Okay.
Correct. The plan amendment indicates the city can elect up to 825, and that is the city's election, not the retirement board. No permission needed from the retirement board.
Okay. So that's nice to know that that's there as we head into this very challenging budget year ahead.
And can I just add one thing very briefly?
Yes.
What that is really for, though, is for the big market downturns. And there will be years where our pension fund is going to lose 35% of its value. That happened in 2009. And when that happens, it's really bad for the city's fiscals because you have to pay more money into the pension at the same time that all your other revenues are declining.
Right.
So that 640,000 that we're now relying on, we wanted to make sure that that didn't compound that damage and have that also be a problem we have to solve for because of a market downturn. And that's really what that reserve is there for, is to protect that 640,000, let it be steady and consistent. And maybe we can incrementally increase it if that reserve grows. But that's the strategy.
Right. And that's the smoothing strategy that we've talked about over the years.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. That's good. All right. So then the OPEB benefits, when we had our meeting with the school board last week, they mentioned that the schools had an additional $60,000 that that was gonna have to come out of operating budget, and the city had an amount as well because of the change to the OPEB benefits.
And,
Go ahead.
and the chair, I will defer to her to give some history and picture. I just want to do from a timeline perspective.
Yeah.
This is in your council adopted investment policy statement. It was based on a recommendation from the retirement board. So the retirement board took action, made this recommendation in May of 2020. Council approved that June 22nd, 2020. That was part of the discussion and the questions that Ms. Hardy was referring to earlier. And it is a process in which we can also have smoothing of volatility. The minimum contribution is a component of your basic and police plan, as well as the OPEB. And I'll turn it over to the chair now, because some of the discussion grew out of a confirmation on how we implement that policy at the November retirement board meeting.
So before you start, Chair Rydberg, and this could be my bad memory, and I would not doubt that. Did we know at the time that we approved that in May and June of 2020 that it was going to cause a operating budget fiscal impact this coming year? Or is that has just occurred because of the way the market is at this time?
We did have that discussion. Ms. Hardy asked that question directly, and I believe my response was in the range of impact for FY22 ranged from 0 to something in the $200,000 range, and it all depended on the results of the valuation. The final impact for FY22 to the city, and I will tell you that I look at this from across the plan perspective. So city, school, total impact for FY22 was $135,000, 60 for the schools and the remainder for the city.
Okay. And will we have we can assume there's going to be a similar impact going forward then for 23, 24?
It is certainly possible. I do want to, and I'm hesitant here. I'm thinking about how much, where I should start with this, but to answer your question directly, yes, there could be that impact in FY23. The purpose of this policy is to smooth out the contributions. So to give some context, in FY17, the school's cost for this plan was $487,000.
Right.
In FY18, 124, FY19, 97, FY20, around 30,000 and 0 last year. What we saw as a retirement board was something that had happened to the pension plan right before the financial crisis of 2008, which is the city had gotten used to very small contributions or 0 contributions, despite the fact that they were providing very valuable benefits. And from a financial fiduciary perspective, we said, much better, let's have everyone put in a little bit every year so that, yes, it's a little bit more this year, But what that will do is instead of going 0, 0, 0, 200 some year, we hope that it'll be 60, 60, 60, 60 and not have the big jumps.
Okay, that makes sense from a planning perspective.
So, and if I can, from the process perspective, so this discussion began in November of 2019 at the retirement board meeting, and that retirement board meeting has the retirement board of finance representatives from the school and the city. And when we received the valuation results from the actuary that year, we noted that everyone's contribution for FY21 was 0. And while that was a great result for FY21, and certainly in light of COVID, we recognize that from a financial perspective, that was not sustainable and better to be putting some money in, just like we are doing with the pension plan. So we noted at that meeting, we'd like to consider putting in that minimum contribution override at that point. We'd like to change the policy. We discussed it at that point. I was very clear about the financial impact to everyone present, the retirement board, city and school financial representatives. We reviewed it again in February. We didn't have the final language that day, so we did discuss it again with everyone present at the May meeting, retirement board, financial staff from the school and the city at our May meeting, which is when the retirement board approved that language, and that it was brought forth to the city council in June when the city council approved the change.
Okay. So that sounds like there was a lot of due diligence that went into that. So thank you. Thank you for explaining that all again. And I'm sure you already explained it back in May. I just want to make sure, I guess, because it sounded at that meeting that the schools were surprised by that. So I just want to make sure that that communication line is open, so that those kind of, because now as we're planning this budget, we have this new operating cost that's going to be added in a time when we have a lot of other operating costs added. So this is directed at all the budget people, just to make sure that we are aware of those things ahead of time. And it sounds like the retirement board has made an attempt to make sure that happens. I just want to make sure that we continue to do that.
Ms. Connolly, have heard you, and we certainly will confirm and continue our good coordination.
Okay.
And I know Karen concurs as well, because she regularly talks with them.
Right, and we've done such a good job of sharing budget and finance information in many other areas. So I just want to make sure this one is also done as well. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Duncan.
Good long discussion. I have the same concerns that the Vice Mayor rose, and we can discuss them further later down the line. If we're still enthralled to the virus when we're in the final stages of next year's budget, it is going to be optically challenging to have a funded pension at more than 100%, which is great, you know, brag for us, but it's just optically challenging to have those numbers there as they are on line 18 at a time when we're going to be telling people that, you know, the belts are going to have to be tightened. So let's just all get ready for that discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. So let's go to line 24, if you could, Ms. there. I'm going to be very brief. I'll raise a bunch of questions tonight, and we can either answer them quickly or you can find something in writing. So if I recall, the initial balance of the water system was around $10 million. I think it's 1.2. And yet there's only 2.5 in the city. So what's the rest of the water system money?
Ms. Ryberg, would you like to answer that first?
I apologize, but the audio was coming in and out, so I did not hear the question.
Sure. line 24 on the chart there. Can you hear me all right?
Your audio is having some challenges, Mr. Snyder. Let me see if I heard it correctly, and then if you could confirm that. You were looking for some clarification on the amount of our original investment, and this is the final amount that was finally decided to invest. There was some earlier, slightly higher numbers, as I recall. I wasn't involved at that time. And so you wanted to clarify, I think, this part and the city's reserve. So what's the real value to the city from that investment?
Yeah,
Did
I
I
guess
answer your question?
the investment was roughly $10 million, and yet the city's reserve account indicates only 2.5 million. And we have the impression that, in essence, the attributed interest to that amount is what we've been adding each year. So I guess the obvious question is, where's the remainder of the $10 million?
So while the initial discussions were to put into the plan around $10 million, the final amount invested was actually 9.2 million.
Okay.
So it's slightly less than the 10 million. From that 9.2 million, it's grown slightly to 9.3. So that's a benefit to the city. The city has in its reserve 2.5 million. So we've got a principal increase of 100,000, a city reserve account of 2.5 million. In addition, during the last 5 years, the city has drawn down on those earnings of 1.4 million. So that's the second table there on line 26. So the city has drawn down 1.4 million. So the value to the city is the increase in the principal of 0.1 million, the reserve count, that's 2.5. So that 2.6 increase you see up on line 24. In addition, the 1.4 million the city has drawn down or used in these last 5 years for a total of $4 million. So $4 million return on 9.2, an average of $800,000 return each year.
Right. I got all that. Thanks for that. No, my question goes up to the chart above, where if you total it up, it's 11.8 million that ought to be in reserve, and yet I only see the city's reserve account at 2.5 million. So explain to me where the remainder of the 9.3 million is, if it's not in the reserve. It's not spent, so what is it?
All of those assets, including the city reserve account, are sitting in the pension trust. Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, I'm going to ask the obvious question about, we've got 9.3 million from the water sale, still there because we've been basically spending the interest and investing that back into the pension system. And yet you're only seeing a city's reserve account of 2.5 million. Why isn't that reserve account 11.8 million instead of 2.5 million? You can either answer quickly tonight or you can get back to me in writing. I know we've got a lot of things on the agenda. So okay. I'll ask one other question. Going back to the earlier chart where we talk about an investment return of 3.6%, that seems pretty unspectacular considering where the stock market has been. Now, I realize there are limitations on how we can invest and should invest pension funds. And I also note that the gross 5-year average return was a lot higher. So what's happened that their average? And I also note that on that chart, the 92 percentile relates to companies that had used the investment model. Are there other investment models that would have gotten us a better return? Again, those are complicated questions and you can get back to me in writing.
Okay, would you prefer that I get back to you in writing?
You can give me a quick answer tonight, but we got a lot on the agenda, so I don't want to further slow things up before I think important questions.
Sure. So I'll just note that the 1-year return is as of June 30th and of 2020. So that's the 12-month period, June 2019 through June 2020. And that period was a challenging time in the market. We had the huge drop in March from COVID, and we were really still in the midst of the recovery as of June. It's certainly come back strongly since June, but for purposes of this report, we take a snapshot of the plans every June 30th.
Okay, thanks. That answered the question. So if I were to ask you what our returns have been since June, I would assume they'd be significantly higher. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, that answers that question. And the other one on the reserve and management of the reserve and the remaining money from the water sale proceeds can get back to me in writing, and I'll provide it to other members of council. So thanks very much for your work. And I'm glad I voted for the investing the water sale proceeds as we did. And I'm glad that our pension, unlike so many others, is fully funded. So thanks much. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? And as just noted, we do have a busy agenda. If not, I'm going to ask one or two. Let me ask, you show gross rate of return. What's a net rate of return?
So the net rate of return for the basic and the police, we have about what's called 68 basis points of investment fees. So just reduce the basic and the police by 0.7%. So 2.9 and 7.5 in that chart. For the OPEB, our expenses are 6 basis points. Roughly the 3.5 drops to 3.4 and the 6.5 drops to 6.4.
Okay. And what's generally just your breakdown in terms of asset classes? 50% equity, 30% bonds, just quickly for people's edification.
Sure. So for the pension plans, it's 70% equities, 15% bonds, and 15% in real estate, infrastructure, and cash. For the OPEB, it's 80% in equities and 20% in bonds.
And are the equities index fund or actively managed?
For OPEB is all index. For the basic and the police, it's a mix of index and active. Index for the large cap and active for the smaller cap and the international.
All right, thank you very much. Looks like we got one final question, and again, a lot to do tonight. Vice Mayor Connolly?
And thank you for letting me speak one more time. As I'm looking at the people who comprise the retirement board, it doesn't look like there's anybody representing schools at all. There's a city manager appointee, and there are 2 elected employee people who are retirees from the city. And I don't see any staff liaisons listed officially. I'm just wondering if we can look, not tonight because I know we got a lot to do, but look in the future at the composition of that committee to make sure that it truly is representing all those who are receiving benefits as well as paying into the fund. And I see that's a city code thing, but if we could look at that, I would appreciate that.
Certainly will make note of that. I'll note this does not include the staff liaisons. And I do want to clarify for the public and anybody listening for the current status, anybody that's covered, listed as elected employee representative, of which there's 2. Those are for basic employees, which includes general government and schools. So every time we do nominations for members who wish to serve, and you'll notice April 2021 will be the next election. School and general government employees are eligible if they're participants in the basic plan. So that for the schools would exclude, Virginia retirement system. But as Ms. Ryberg mentioned, we do have quite a few school employees in basic. They're eligible to run to serve, and they're also eligible to vote. So they do represent the school employees. There is a formal representation.
Okay.
And I will note that the retirement board acts as a unified body, and I'll ask Ms. Ryberg if she wants to add, but they do look out for all the participants.
Okay, I think maybe we just need to take a look at the procedures between what's going on with the school HR and just to make sure that everything is appropriately shared and passed around. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. So we're nearly an hour into this meeting. I don't think we're even started public comments. So are there any further questions on this matter? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Ryberg, and for your colleagues' great work. We really appreciate it. Let's move on now to summary of written comments, Madam Clerk.
Yes. Regarding COVID-19, Matt Adams of Park Towers, 200 North Maple Avenue, asked that the city post signs in parks to urge parents to put masks on children. Pamela Barton, 6311 Aqua Terrace in Falls Church, asked that COVID-19 vaccines be voluntary, as did Kenny Moss of 305 Shirley Street. Richard Levine asked that bars, gyms, and indoor restaurant service be closed to combat rising COVID-19 infection rates. Steve Mostow of 204 Grove Avenue asked that masks be made mandatory at all times for all extracurricular activities, including all sporting practices and games in all city facilities, including the schools and community center. He also asked for a local testing event in conjunction with Fairfax Health. Andy Rankin asked that the city lobby state officials to implement more stringent limits on indoor gatherings, including restaurants and bars. Peter Seitz, 701 Randolph Street, expressed concern about students being allowed to participate in sports activities before all students are returned to in-person learning. Regarding the school name change, June and Mike Beyer wrote in support of changing the names of George Mason High School and Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, as did Amaya Lambert, who also provided resources for learning to be an ally. Dennis Tolliver, 525 Timber Lane, wrote against changing the name of George Mason High School. Regarding the Broad and Washington project, the Housing Commission provided comments on that project. Jacqueline Graff of 411 Hampton Court asked that the city not sell the parking lot at that location. Allison Brown of 706 Poplar Drive asked that more affordable dwelling units be added to the Broad and Washington development. And Claudia and Eric Schultz of 107 Lawton Street wrote in opposition to the most recent Broad and Washington development proposal. They requested that all parts of the project adjoining their property be held to a height of 35 feet, especially at the back corner of their lot where a 67-foot tall section is planned to be 20 feet from their fence. In other comments, Johanna Bell, 314 Wrens-Way, asked for a plan to provide affordable and workforce housing, citing salaries of teachers and police officers in the city. The Environmental Sustainability Council, ESC, sent a request for the mayor to sign a statement supporting the Paris Climate Agreement. The ESC also sent a letter of thanks for staff's additional work to continue the household hazardous waste disposal event in October, given COVID. And the ESC's Energy Transition Subcommittee provided a memo that gave guidance on achieving COG's 2030 regional gas emissions reduction goals in the city.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go on to receipt of public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to speak tonight, Madam Clerk?
Yes, we do have members of a Girl Scout troop 3850 joining us, and I have the names of the students. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 6 people who are signed up to speak. Would you like me to call the names? And
Are they going to speak separately?
They are. They each signed up as a public.
Sure.
Public
All right,
comment.
well, call each of them then.
And so if this is not the correct order that you all want to go, just let me know. But I have Sarah Bockelman up first. Does that work for you?
Sure, works for us.
So sorry to interrupt, but they will all be speaking together within 3 minutes.
Okay, and so do you guys just want to take it away and go in order?
Yes, we'll just, they're all prepared.
Okay, good. Well,
Madam Clerk, do you want to read their names just
Sure,
for the
I'll read the
record and
names.
also for posterity?
sure. The group is Sarah Bockelman, Katie Villasmil. Does Katie want to correct me?
Katarina
Lasmil.
Katarina Velasmil, Stella Kawar, Lucy Tuomu, Sophie Johnson, and Carmen Ortiz.
All right, welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Madam Clerk and Mayor Tarter and the City Council. We really appreciate this opportunity to let our troop speak to you and tell them their view, tell you about their views on vaping and some anti-vaping ideas that they have. So thank you very much.
Hello, we are middle school students in Girl Scout Troop 3850. We are working on our Bronze Award project to make a long-lasting impact in our community. We have learned that vaping is a serious issue at all schools, especially our high school. This is why we want to educate our community, especially students, about how bad vaping is for you. We would like to request a zoning ordinance to ban vaping, vape shops, and smoking shops near Falls Church schools.
People think that vaping is a healthy way to quit smoking, but vaping once is as bad as smoking a whole pack of cigarettes. Vape pens are made with metals that harm your body, including tin, nickel, lead, and mercury. Vape pens also have some of the same ingredients found in insulation that can cause cancer and breathing difficulties. Vape pens also have harmful chemicals like propylene glycol, which is found in antifreeze.
Many people like to buy flavors for their vape pen, but the cinnamon, vanilla, cherry, and many more flavors in vape pens can react with propylene glycol, a main ingredient in many vape juices, to create entirely new chemicals. Once the ingredients mix into your vape pen, entirely new and much more dangerous chemicals are created. You won't even know that you're inhaling these vapors, and they can cause long-term lung issues.
Vaping also affects the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain responsible for decision-making, critical thinking, personality, and monitoring social behavior. Vaping can also affect your memory, attention, and mood, and even increase your risk of other types of addiction later on. Vaping puts a chemical called nicotine into your body. Nicotine is highly addictive and can slow brain development, affect your memory, attention, concentration, and cause many health problems.
Not only is vaping terrible for you, it also ages your appearance, making you look older than you actually are, giving you bags under your eyes, gray hair, and wrinkles. Sometimes people think it's cool to vape until they see what they look like after. Nicotine constricts your blood vessels, reducing blood flow to your skin. When your blood flow is reduced, your skin doesn't get all of the nutrients it needs to stay healthy, and that's what makes your skin look older.
These are some of the many reasons we want to request a zoning ordinance to ban vaping, vape shops, and smoking shops near the schools. We also hope that the City Council lobby of the state legislature will ban vaping in Virginia. We would love your support to make it our vision a reality. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us.
Well, thank you all for doing such a great job and highlighting that such an important issue. Just a few things in response, if I could. One, to my recollection, we have prohibited vaping at the 10-acre development. Is that your recollection, Mr. Shields, as well? As one of the prohibited uses?
Mayor, I believe that is listed as one of the prohibited uses in the program. Yes, sir.
Yes, so I guess, ladies, this is my understanding. We do have the city attorney on the line as well, and she can join in. But in Virginia, many of the laws and things that we can and can't do as a locality are governed by what the state allows or doesn't allow us to do. And to my knowledge, I don't believe localities have the authority to prohibit vaping outright throughout the city. And so what we've done is prohibited it in new developments, or at least shops that sell vaping equipment in the new developments that we've had any say in, such as the 10-acre development being constructed next to the school, and possibly, to my recollection, in Founders Row, and also the Whole Foods project. So we're very concerned about the issue, just as you are. But to my understanding, there are limitations on what we can do as a locality. But the city attorney's on the line, and I hate to catch you off guard, but would you be able to comment, Madam City Attorney?
Sure. Well, what I think is just what you've said, that the city cannot, or under current law, and this is something we might look at getting the legislature to change, but under current law, the city isn't able to just prohibit vaping because the state doesn't do that, and we're not allowed to have stricter rules than the state does right now. And also, on the zoning side, we would not be able to treat a vape store differently than another retail store that could, that sort of acted the same way, because it wouldn't be a zoning purpose to prohibit the vaping stores. But the mayor's right. We have tried in those areas where we do have authority to control what types of businesses will go into a place. We have tried to limit these businesses, and in particular, the West End Development Project, which is going to be right near the schools. We don't want them selling the vaping equipment.
Okay, well, listen, I want to thank you all for coming to speak to us on this important issue. We hope you'll continue your advocacy and your good work, and we look forward to hearing more from you all. Looks like one of the council members would like to say something as well. Mr. Snyder and then Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Sure. Thanks very much, and thanks for the very well done presentation to the Girl Scout troop. We have our legislative program on this agenda later on tonight, and hopefully we can talk about adding a legislative request if it's not already in there, consistent with what we've been asked. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, I want to thank you, ladies, for coming and speaking tonight and taking an interest in civics and how we live and work in this city. And I would just encourage all of you. It's one of the things I love about Falls Church is the activism and the volunteerism amongst the community. So I would just encourage you all to continue to take an interest in making Falls Church better at every turn. And we'll do what we can within the laws and regulations that are afforded us by Richmond and the state legislature. But again, thank you all for coming forward. I certainly appreciate it. And I think y'all did a very fine job tonight in stating your case and putting forward your desires and requests to make some changes here. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.
All right, thanks again. So let's move on. Madam Clerk, are there
Thank you
additional
very
public
much.
comments this evening?
Nope, this was it for this evening.
All right, are there any council requests? All right, let's move on to the report. We have one, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. Am I unmuted yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Request for city manager. So given that the new COVID restrictions are in effect starting today, Wyatt, I want to see whether you could just give a brief update on any changes to city programs, enforcement, especially around the universal masking that we've been talking about.
Okay, well, I'm about to start the city manager's report. Were there any other requests before I launch into that?
I think that's it.
Okay.
All right.
Well, Council, I would like to give a report on just that, the Councilmember Hardy's question. And Joe Carter has joined us with this meeting, and I've asked him to give an update on the governor's orders as well as the vaccine planning that we're doing as a region. But before we get to Mr. Carter's report on these topics, I would like to first provide a report to the City Council and to the public on discussions that we've been having with Falls Church Gateway Partners on the 10-acre site. And Ms. Mester, if you could call up the slides that we have prepared for this. So I will go through about 7 or 8 slides just to provide an overview for the public on these discussions. And then we'll have questions on it. I do want to note at the outset that we are joined on this call by representatives of Falls Church Gateway Partners, including Evan Goldman with EYA and Robin Betterell of Hoffman and Associates. And before I get started, also, I just want to thank a number of people who've been sort of slaving away on this very difficult issue, and that includes Carol McCoskey and Ted Risher, who are also both on the call and available to answer any questions that the City Council has. As everyone knows, we are in the midst of a pandemic that does have very significant economic fallout, and particularly in the ability to finance new commercial investments in the areas of hospitality, in office, and in retail, which are some of the key components of the 10-acre site of West Falls, there by the high school. The Falls Church Gateway Partners, as the council and the public knows, have been working very hard on the site plan for this project, and have been also in discussions and I think near completion of negotiation of economic terms with a number of the component partners in this project. As they have been working through those negotiations and as they've been looking at the financial markets for commercial real estate, they have notified the city of a request to change the terms of the comprehensive agreement relating to both the timing of closing on the 99-year ground lease and in terms of the economics of that ground lease. As the public knows, the City Council adopted the comprehensive agreement that lays out all those terms in June of 2019. Falls Church Gateway Partners has made their first payment under that comprehensive agreement of $6.5 million, which was paid at the time of that execution. So we're looking for how to move forward. So tonight I will discuss a set of terms that are part of what will be a non-binding memorandum of understanding that I would sign and put before the City Council. We will have a town hall meeting in which we've set tentatively at this point for Thursday, December 17th at noon. And one thing we've just observed is that during this pandemic, people often are working from home and they can participate during the middle of the day. So this time of the noon time slot is intended to be a time that is convenient for the public before we get into some of the more intensive holiday weeks. So we want to have people's attention on this and have a chance to discuss it and ask questions about it. What is proposed also is that on January 11th, the City Council would hold a public hearing on these changes that I'm about to describe, and then have final consideration of an amendment to the comprehensive agreement. Cindy, next slide. There you go. So as I go through the changes, a couple of things I'll just note up front that has not changed, and that is the program. I think both the city and Falls Church Gateway Partners are very committed to the vibrancy of this mix of uses of the hotel, the office, the civic space, the senior housing, the condos and the apartments, how they all work together to create a great retail environment. And that is really the core of what has always been the vision for that site, and that has remained intact throughout these discussions. What also has not changed is Falls Church Gateway's commitment to carry out the demolition of the high school by May 29th, and that's important because that's on the critical path for Gilbane to complete the construction of the high school, notably the trapezoid-shaped parking area and the plaza that it forms the entrance to the high school. So what has changed? So we'll go through these in a bit more detail, but the delivery date is delayed by approximately 6 months. Again, the demolition would stay on track, but the delivery date of the program would be delayed approximately 6 months. That's our current forecast. There'd be a reduction in the capitalized ground lease payments, and I'll describe that in more detail in just a moment. There's an increase in the ground rent payments. If you'll recall, there's a smaller stream of payments that occur over the whole 99-year lease that in aggregate actually are quite large, but on an annual basis are smaller than the capitalized ground lease payments. Those increase under these changes. And then there are some profit sharing provisions that are either new or revised in this proposal. Next slide, please. So the capitalized lease payments, in terms of trying to address the constriction in the commercial real estate investment markets, particularly for these types of uses, Falls Church Gateway Partners has requested a reduction in the capitalized lease payments, which are scheduled of 4 payments of $7 million each over the next 4 years, that those would be reduced to 4 payments of $4.5 million. So that is a reduction in the capitalized ground lease from the current $34.5 million down to a proposed $25.5 million. That's a $9 million reduction in the capitalized lease payments. So that's significant and that's sobering. And that's a big part of what we're discussing tonight. The ground rent payments, they would start earlier under this proposal and they would escalate at a higher rate. So if you'll recall, they were scheduled to start in 2029 at the rate of $200,000 per year, and then would it continue for the life of the lease, of the 99-year lease. They would be moved forward 4 years, and they would start in the year 2025. And they would escalate at a rate of 2.75% as opposed to 2%. They would also increase, there'd be a $25,000 plus up to that stream of payments that would occur in 2031 and then continue on for the life of the lease. So that, when you do that for a 99-year lease, that results in a large increase in the nominal value. It is, when you do a present value calculation on that, it's a smaller amount, but that nominal increase is $45.7 million. The present value all in of all of these changes without the profit share provisions, which I'll describe on the next slide, represents a decrease in value on present day dollars to the city of $3.2 million in total, and a nominal value increase of $35.8 million. Again, that's the power of increasing that stream of ground rent payments over the 99-year term of the lease. Next slide, Cindy. This is the same information presented in a chart format so people can just see it and understand it a bit more easily. So again, the $6.5 million payment that has been paid and received by the city, and that's being used right now to help cover our debt service in the current fiscal year. In FY22, the $7 million payment would be reduced to $4.5 million, and that would be repeated again through the next 4 years. In 2025, there's one of the profit participation items I'll describe in the next slide that would kick in potentially in 2025. And then in 2026, there's sort of a tail capitalized payment of $1 million. And then in that fiscal year, the $200,000 ground rent would begin in 2026. And then that ground rent just continues on through the rest of the lease term of 99 years with that $25,000 increase that occurs in 2031. Next slide, Cindy. The profit share provisions, so there's 2 principal ones, and the first is new to the comprehensive agreement, and that would be a profit participation on the sale of the condos. So the condos would come to market in the 2024-2025 timeframe. When they sell, at the end there's a sort of there's an accounting of what the what the value on a square foot basis would be. And if that value is above $750, then the city will participate in 30% of that value above $750. So that's a comparable price for condos that are selling in the Tyson's marketplace right now. It is a higher value than what we're seeing in the city right now, but this is a product that the partnership is intending to bring to the city that is at a higher level than any product that we have in the city today. The second profit participation item is sharing 50% with the partnership of what's called the land lift. So when the project goes to construction loan, there's a reappraisal of the property, and the city will get 50% of that increase. And if there is an increase in the property above the current price that is now in this modified agreement, the city would receive 50% of that value. Now that same provision exists in the comprehensive agreement today, but it's at 1/4 or 25% of the land lift. The capital administrative fee in the current agreement that is applied to any sales or refinances of the leasehold, that is now out of the agreement. The 25 basis points capital administrative fee on the condos is kept in the agreement. The first sale of the condos is exempted from that fee. It would apply to future sales after that. Next slide, Cindy. So other key provisions, the high school demolition, this agreement would be conditioned upon the high school being demolished and out of the way of the trapezoid area by May 29 of 2021 and stay on the critical path for Gilbane to finish the completion of the high school. The Washington Gas Regulator Station, that is currently to be covered by the developer. Under this amendment, the city will take on that responsibility. Under our franchise agreement, Washington Gas is responsible for covering the cost of relocating facilities when so requested by the city. So we're pursuing that with Washington Gas as we speak. The payment in lieu of taxes, which is a tax abatement program just during the construction period for the site, that remains unchanged. And the closing date, the next payment date, would be due on December 31st of 2021. There is still a discussion with the development team in terms of what the final outside closing date will be. We're looking at April 1 of 2022. But that is one issue that is, remains outstanding. Next slide, Cindy. In terms of our ability to cover our debt, this is the sort of the principal motivator of taking this property to market. We do have in this chart a show that we are covering our debt service. So that center column where it shows the use of funds, the drawdown on our capital reserves, thank you, Cindy. We have in the current fiscal year, if we ultimately have to pay for the Washington Gas Regulator, our pull down on capital reserves will be $6.4 million, bringing our capital reserves down to $10 million. After that, we stabilize in that $5 to $4 million range to cover debt service, and the land sale proceeds will cover that debt service until the tax revenues step up to cover it. I'll also note that $10 million payment is still in the deal. That's the phase 2 payment for the office and residential component of phase 2. That remains unchanged in this amendment. But the bottom line with this change is that while the capital land proceeds are not what they were, they do remain sufficient to cover the debt service for the high school. Next slide. So what is being discussed here all would be subject to the completion of the trapezoid area of the high school by May 29th, and then an obligation to diligently pursue the remainder of the demolition scope. There are other performance measures in this term sheet, and in them includes the proceeding with the negotiation of the transactional elements with the component partners of this development, so that we have visibility that the project is moving forward. So that's a quick summary, and Cindy, maybe you could just go back, maybe go back up to that first slide so we can just talk about the process going forward. Again, we've got we wanted to get these terms out to the public so the public could express their views on them, also ask questions about them, as we've done throughout this project, where we've had countless town hall meetings to keep the public informed. We're committed to continue to do that. And so that Thursday town hall meeting, which again is tentative, I want to get that date vetted and make sure that that is the most convenient date for the public to participate. We would stick with that date, and we'll publicize that. January 11th is the date by which we would have this before the City Council for public hearing and for the Council's consideration. So let me stop there. I did note that we do have members from Falls Church Gateway Partnership on this call, as well as Mr. Risher and Ms. McCoskey, and we're all here to answer any questions that you have. I'll just close by saying this has been an incredibly difficult year, and this is news that nobody wants to hear. We certainly have worked very hard to do two things. One, to find a way with Falls Church Gateway Partners to move forward and stay on schedule in a very difficult environment. But we also recognize that this is not the deal that the public saw 2 years ago. And, we do want the public's input on this. And so we wanted to make sure there was time for that, for people to process it, ask questions about it, and make their views on it known as well. It will be my recommendation to move forward with this, that when you consider the consequences of delay or other consequences, that making these changes is preferable to those other consequences. But that's not a recommendation that is easily made, I assure you. So let me stop there and answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you very much. Our first question or comment is from Mr. Snyder.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So let me start with the process here. For a number of weeks, I've been objecting to going into closed session. So I am glad that we are providing at least some degree of transparency, late as it is. The second point I want to make is that the developer here is demanding a renegotiation of an agreement that was publicly written and signed off on, using as the basis a legal theory for which the city disagrees. So basically what we have is a developer demanding renegotiation and significant changes of an agreement, point number one. Point number two, the changes demanded by the developer as outlined in the proposal tonight would significantly increase the city's risk and devalue the city's value in this contract of $9 million over the next 3 or 4 years. The payments are significantly reduced and they're delayed. I find that increasing the city's financial risk unacceptable. The final point I would make is that there's nothing that will prevent a recurrence from demands to yet again renegotiate this agreement in the future, creating even greater disruption for the city's plans in the future. In my view, they're not acting as a partner, and for the reasons stated, I have serious doubts about the wisdom of the proposal being made here tonight. In large measure because of how it came about, how it's been argued by the developer, and the significant financial loss of value to the city in the near term, at a point where we're dealing with many demands on our budget. So those are my comments. I await the public's view. If the public takes a different view of this and finds it acceptable, it is, after all, the public's project, not mine alone. But my advice would be to reject this and move forward with a much better deal than has been negotiated so far. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Are there other comments or questions or requests from council? Ms. Hardy?
Great, thank you. So clearly, as you said, Mr. Shields, this is certainly not the situation that any of us hope for. A question for you first, and then two for the developer. In terms of the fiscals and tax yield, we talked about how payments would move out by around 4 months or so with the closing. Did the fiscals and the schedule that we've outlined originally change at all as well?
So we, in our financial modeling, we have traditionally weighted the ground lease payments really strongly in our fiscal modeling. knowing that tax yield can be subject to a whole bunch of other market forces. And so we've always been conservative on tax yield. What is in the chart that is in this presentation shows the tax yield coming online based on what the payment in lieu of taxes is, and then capping out at a positive net fiscal impact of $4 million. I think the staff analysis is the net fiscal impact is higher than that $4 million, but when you turn it over to our finance department, they tend to reduce that to provide the city with additional buffer.
And do we think that in light of kind of the post-COVID environment, our tax yield assumptions change any?
Well, it's a good question. Obviously, if it delivered today, it would have a huge delta between the modeled tax yield and what the reality would be for the hotel transient occupancy taxes, the meals taxes, the sales taxes. The expectation, however, the challenge today is to obtain financing that in 4 years when this product delivers, that COVID will be in the rearview mirror. And so we're taking a close look at, the EDA hosted a summit on sort of the future of a lot of these types of uses. We're trying to follow the market very closely, and obviously Falls Church Gateway Partners is following it very closely. They could probably speak to it better than I could, but I can tell you it's reasonable to be cautious about it, but also realize that this is not going to, these are for buildings that will deliver 4 years from now.
Yeah, and so clearly no one likes the idea of $9 million less in those initial payments, but hopefully the long-term tax yield is largely still there. So it's a good segue to kind of turn to my questions and comments for the developer. So clearly I think we all understand the extraordinary circumstances, but I think as you can expect, we all have our share of grumpiness with having to deal with this. Kind of a two-part question. So one, building on the questions I asked Mr. Shields, what sort of assurances can you give us that you will perform in the long run? So having done this twice now, I'd love to kind of get a better sense of that kind of long-term commitment to the city, because ultimately I think the reason why we went with Falls Church Gateway is we believed in the partnership, we believed in your ability to pull this off. And I know that we are in extraordinary circumstances, but I'd love to kind of get some more assurance on that. And then the related question is, assuming we can get past this, what are the other risks that are in front of you that we should be aware of? Because hopefully there's none left, because clearly we're taking a big hit on value in the front end here. But I'd love to make sure that we are transparent with the public of what other risks you envision and being able to move ahead with this.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So we, I'll try to take it in two parts. I mean, in terms of the risks outstanding before us, I certainly wish there were no more risks. That would be great for all of us. We probably wouldn't have had to come and ask for something if that were the case. I think, to lay it out quite bare for you, the major risk outstanding at this point is the costs of the construction. We are, at a certain point in the development of the drawings. Folks who are more familiar with the building industry will understand that you develop your drawings over time. You start with what's called schematic sets, you move on to a design development set, and then you ultimately move on to a set of documents called a construction set of documents. Those are the actual documents that a contractor will take and give you the final pricing and also use those to construct the project. So at each of those milestones, you get sort of estimate pricing along the way. And you work, to maintain and keep your design within the confines of the budget that you have. But obviously things can happen. In particular, one thing that happened this year, which won't affect our project, we hope, was that the raw price of lumber has gone through the absolute roof. Indications that people are home. They're seeing a lot of home fix-it projects, stuff like that. Home Depot and Lowe's kind of bought up all the existing supply, and so a lot of commercial projects that are stick construction have suffered that sort of raw material market pricing. So things like that certainly remain an outstanding risk. We believe that the numbers that we're holding in our model will stand. You include escalation numbers, you include contingencies, you include all sorts of things to try to make sure you're well protected, but you just can't foresee sort of outlier events like the price of lumber all of a sudden spiking and things like that. So that's probably our largest remaining outstanding risk. We are in the process of negotiating these sort of third-party deals with a grocer and with some others. We think the risk is relatively low, that we don't get to those negotiations. We're quite close with at least one of them, and quite far along with two others. So, but we don't control those third parties, so that remains an outstanding risk for us. And frankly, I don't think any of us foresaw this pandemic. So, should we all hope the vaccine
Robin, I think we've lost your sound, unless it's me.
I'm not hearing Robin either. Looks like her video froze.
All right, maybe she can call back in. Evan, are you on the line as well? Evan? All right, I don't see, let me see if he's listening.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Do you want to finish
okay,
that
great.
question, Evan? With that
Yeah,
answer?
sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I apologize. I was talking for the last few minutes. I think I know where Robin was headed. So I think the way I would answer the question, Councilmember Hardy, is basically what we've asked for in the last few months, even though it's been painful, gets us over kind of the impact that we've seen already due to COVID, essentially, right? Whether it was changes to underwriting
Hello?
or really more.
There we go.
Yeah, but what the
Can you guys
risks
hear me
going
now?
forward? Yeah, we can hear you. The risks. I was just finishing up. The risks going forward are more typical development risks that you would have in any project, which is why we're less nervous about those risks, because those are risks that you typically think through in your project. With the help of the council, if we're able to get through this process, we're able to at least right the ship and get to a place where it's a more typical project again, close to. It's still not quite where it was. Whereas, the extraordinary headwinds we've been seeing in the last 6 months would have made the project completely unfinanceable, and that puts us all in a bad situation. So the goal was, how do we get to a project that will be financeable, and then, of course, deal with more typical real estate risks that you would have. And I think what Robin was mentioning, primarily construction cost risks are huge. And of course, if one of our partners were to walk away, I think we have backups in mind for some of those partners if they were to walk away. So that's kind of a more typical development risk than what we're seeing from the pandemic.
Yeah, to my mind, those are your risks as well, not the city's risk. So, I mean, I know that the coronavirus is sort of an extraordinary circumstance, but the ones you've just described, cost of materials and things like that, to my mind, are your risk, not ours going forward.
Yeah.
All right, other questions, comments? Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First question for Evan and Robin, one of you guys. What's our alternative if this deal can't get done with you guys? I mean, you've mentioned unfinanceable, talked a lot about a risk and downside. What's the alternative here?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Ross. Sorry.
Well, this particular deal change is being opened up to public comment, and is something that still has to be discussed amongst council. So if these deal terms can't be agreed to, what is the alternative for the plan for you guys as you see it?
In terms of what our alternative is?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right. Well, I think we've already sent our notice to the city that we see that COVID-19 has been a force majeure event, and as such, we would be in that sort of suspension of time caused until the
force majeure event had concluded.
Okay.
So it would be a delay in the project.
Okay.
And then Ross, to your question also, this is Evan, and we haven't really gone here because we know that it's not the goal of the city. I mean, clearly you could make this project work as a largely residential and retail project with maybe a little bit less retail, get rid of the office and hotel, which are a little bit more risky, or maybe keep the office but get rid of the hotel. So there's things you could do to the plan to make the land value payments what we had agreed to, and salvage the project. But I think, we know that that's not a place the council is really interested in going, and so we haven't approached that. But that would be a way to try to solve the problem if you guys don't want to agree to the agreement here.
Okay. Yeah, I know that we have some disagreement on exactly what entails force majeure, and I believe we've spent quite a bit of time trying to work through that. I don't think anybody's happy about having to. No one is happy about having to revisit this. I think the alternative, and again, this is just me speaking personally, is that this deal would have to wait. But unfortunately, I think our position is that that we're not going to allow for that luxury, and there is too much downside risk here. I have a question, Ted. Are you on the phone, Ted?
Yes.
I want to get some clarity around the numbers. I'm disappointed we gave up our capital event fee on the leasehold interest. Happy that we kept it for condos. And I feel, based on my math, though, if I'm thinking through the number of times that leasehold improvements would change, the ground rent increase that we negotiated on the back end, which was effectively, from my opinion, looks to be, I call it penance or compensation for the additional risk we've taken, allowing those payments to be reduced up front and extended, but picking up that additional ground rent, the total nominal value of, I believe it was close to $36 or $37 million. Does that, generally speaking, how close does that come to equating to what we would have modeled from a nominal perspective for capital event fees? Do you know? Do you have any idea?
So just on the ground rent, the nominal gain was $45.7 million. The 37 you discussed included the reduction in the upfront payments.
Mm-hmm.
So the increase in the ground rent was 45.7, and obviously it depends on how many times per whatever time period we would assume the leasehold elements would change hands.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly on a. I haven't discounted that ground rent. It's a couple $1 million. I think it's reasonable to assume that on a present value basis, those two sums could be equal.
Okay. Because I just did some kind of quick calculations, and it seems to be the case. I mean, the real rub here is that it looks like we've slipped a little bit on present value. And I believe we talked about this before, but for the numbers tonight, what's the discount rate that you've used for to get to that present value?
3.5.
Deals. 3.5. Okay. I think it's important for folks that are listening. We talk about nominal, we talk about present value, and the present value is discounting that future cash flow at a specific rate. And generally speaking, and Ted, you feel free to disagree with me, from a municipal perspective, it wouldn't be outside of the realm of what would be deemed appropriate to use a lower discount rate that is closer to what our borrowing rate would be, which is one discount rate assumption. And our borrowing rate, I think, is closer to 2.6, 2.7. And if you were to adjust that discount rate to something that is more comparable to municipal tax-free 20-year bond borrowing, our present value, if I'm not mistaken, would probably go higher than the present value that we had at the initial comprehensive agreement. Is that right, Ted?
I just toggled it to about 2.5%, and with the last round of numbers, the city's up $500,000 in present value.
Okay. So from my standpoint, the risk here is one, we've got lower capitalized ground payments. We've picked up nominal value in the long term, which for me personally, I think the back end benefit, the cash flow that we're going to get that is guaranteed through ground rent in perpetuity, or at least through the remainder of this ground lease is of interest to me, because that's guaranteed money that we have coming in. So we've effectively shifted it. You know, it's unfortunate, but I will tell you, because I work in commercial real estate, the reality of the situation is the real estate development market has effectively been has hit the pause button since COVID started. And so there being some delay in the delivery of the project is not surprising. And the mix of uses that we had put into the PPEA for this development, just the number of uses was inherently riskier than, you know, if we'd have done a predominantly residential project. So to a large degree, the development as it stands is going to be riskier for all parties, and it's unfortunate and unforeseen that a global pandemic hit and absolutely decimated retail. So I'm not terribly surprised, but again, not happy at all. But I think that given the choices that that we have here and what we'd like to get out of this deal, I think that this is, you know, this is a pretty good deal considering the circumstances. I won't say a good deal, but it's good considering the circumstances. So I'm happy we were able to at least claw back the present value, and happy that we were able to get more guaranteed in the long run and preserve the use types. But I will say, having to come back to the negotiating table twice now with the development partner, I feel that from our standpoint, for the benefit of our taxpayers and what we were elected to do, my patience has certainly been used up completely. And so I hope that Wyatt and Carol, written into this amendment or agreement to this comprehensive agreement, that that there is no chance that the developer could be seeking a renegotiation for this, barring something even more catastrophic than a pandemic. But I personally don't want to have this conversation again, and I don't think we should have to. I feel that we have been more than gracious in trying to solve the problem from both ends, and everyone's appropriately taken on risks that is very concrete and tangible. So that's all the questions I have for now. But I'll reserve the right to ask some others depending on what comes up here in the next little while.
All right, Ms. Hiscott.
Ross just took some of the words right out of my mouth with that last statement. As he ran through the numbers is one thing, but the cycling back to that comment and then letting Councilwoman Hardy's question about assurances for performance. We've already been through 2 rounds of negotiation. Just want to state clearly that the expectation is that we don't renegotiate upon each component of this agreement moving forward. And to Ross's point, I want to look forward to hearing what those assurances would be, both legal and financial. So I don't know if you want to comment on that now or come back to that from a staff and developer perspective.
I mean, I can comment somewhat to the level of assurances in terms of what our investment to date has been and what our investment will be over the course of the next year. We have $13 million currently invested in the deal. By the time we get to the end of 2021, we will have close to $22 million invested in the deal. I don't know how to provide much more assurance than that. That is enormous for anyone familiar with commercial real estate. That is an enormous amount of at-risk capital to have out before you even own an asset. So we are all in on making this happen, making it happen for the city. We have, I understand the perception of the frustration, but I sort of wish that the council had been a little bit closer to us over the last 6 months, because we have absolutely toiled to try to preserve the aspects of the deal and the project that we understood to be most important to the city, and to make those happen. And, you know, Ross, I appreciate you acknowledging that the particular mix of uses on the site absolutely were kind of the perfect storm in terms of the COVID pandemic and the asset classes in real estate that were hardest hit. And, you know, we didn't want to be here any more than you wanted us to be here, quite frankly. And so we appreciate all the work that staff and Wyatt and Carol and everyone have done as we've kind of worked through this over the last 6 months. And Dave Snyder, I appreciate that you wish it had been a more transparent process. Obviously, the sensitivity of the partnerships that we have in the deal and some of the active negotiations going on with those partnerships prohibited that. But I do want you all to know that we did toil to try to preserve what we have here, and for both the city and for ourselves. So I think that the best assurance I can give you is just the sheer dollar figures that we have invested in the deal, and that we will continue to invest in the deal going forward. You can be sure we'll be working our absolute tails off to make this happen.
Vice Mayor Connolly.
Mrs. Scott, do you have any other questions before I go?
No, go ahead, Mary Beth.
Okay. So I guess I want to thank my colleagues on council for covering the big picture of the deal and how this is going to look for the next 10 years. I really want to focus right now on what's going to happen in the next 8 months, because the part that is really concerning to me is the demolition of George Mason High School, the current old high school, and how that fits into the plans for completing the new high school. Because as you know, Robin and Evan, the whole reason we're doing all this commercial development is so that we are able to pay for this beautiful new high school that is scheduled to open in January. And the final piece of that is the demolition of George Mason High School, which is all wrapped up in this whole plan. So my concern is I just want to make sure that as we are going through this and renegotiating this, you are preparing to start the demolition of that high school. And that's my big concern. So can you answer that first, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions?
Yes, as per Wyatt's presentation, we are planning to do that. We have a plan in place. We have met with Gilbane and the schools. We've outlined the schedule, and we are prepared to move forward so long as we are able to reach agreement on these terms.
Okay, so suppose we aren't able to reach agreement on these terms, then that the demolition is not going to happen.
We would not, we would be in the force majeure, in our opinion, we would be in a force majeure pause, if you will, suspension of time on the performance.
Right, but you are aware that there's no way we can pause the demolition of the high school. That's part of the deal, is that for us, it's really important that no matter what happens with the rest of the deal, the demolition of the high school has got to happen in the next 6 months. Or otherwise, it would become another big expense for us, not only to do it, but to do it late if you aren't able to complete it in the time that it needs to be done.
Right. I'm just telling you what the contractual our contractual position. We absolutely understand the practical terms. So I'll defer to Wyatt on this one, but we have agreed to complete the demo.
Okay.
As part of this package of terms.
So are there milestones or benchmarks?
I should say complete the demo within the original performance milestone timeframe.
Right. Okay. So are there milestones?
Which in our opinion would be altered in a force majeure event. So that's kind of the new one, if you will.
I understand. Are there, so starting like right now, today or next week, are there milestones that you can point to where you're doing things so that the school will be able to be demolished in May? Are they part of our?
We have a full kind of checklist and schedule, which we've shared in our kind of bi-weekly campus coordination meetings with everyone over there. So we would kind of begin on the first item of that list, which I don't have off the top of my head, but we have shared that list with that entire team, including city staff, And so we would sort of begin on that task list.
Okay. It seems that even as we have been talking about this over the last few years, it's continually been okay, we just have to keep the pedal to the metal and keep going because we have this deadline coming up and this construction deadline coming up and this one coming up. So I want to make sure that you're working with the schools to make sure that May 29th deadline is going to be met.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I said, we attend a meeting every 2 weeks with them and have kept that communication going.
Okay, so Mr. Shields, what would be our remedy?
This agreement is critical for us to maintain that schedule.
Right. I'm glad that it's critical to you.
And it's the agreement's also conditioned upon the demolition, and so that's obviously a very powerful requirement. And so with this amendment, I think we would be very confident in how that portion of this, of everything is moving forward. But the demolition, we could be very confident in that.
Okay. And I think Dr. Noonan is on this call. I don't know if he had any other thoughts to add to this one regarding the importance of this. Is he here?
I am here. I'm listening in.
Okay.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of the conversation. I appreciate the opportunity just to ask. I've been in those coordination meetings that Robin has mentioned, and there were 2 schedules that were shared recently. I think each of those schedules were past the May 29th deadline. So I just want to make sure that my advocacy again would be if it's May 29th, that's the date that we would see a new revised schedule from Falls Church Gateway Partners that actually would get the demolition done by May 29th.
Yeah, Peter, since we met last, I think, I can't remember exactly, it's been a long couple weeks, we have been working to make sure that the trapezoid area and the whole parking lot areas of the school are fully out of the way by May 29th. The entire school won't be able to be down, but we've figured out kind of a break line in the building where we can get that portion of it completely cleared out by then. And then we'll have to continue working on the east side of the site. But we'll be fully out of the way of Gilbane by May 29th.
Thank you. Would it be possible to schedule that shows exactly what the milestones are updated based on what you've just shared that shows that so that we can kind of track?
Yeah, I'll have Greg send an update to what we reviewed in that meeting and that's sort of what we've been working on our side over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you,
Right.
Vice Mayor Conley.
Thanks. And Mr. Shields, I just have another follow-up question on that one, and that is, similar to the Library Construction Oversight Committee, where city council members are privy to some of the things, those kind of things. I'm wondering if that schedule could be shared with council as well, just so that we're aware of what those milestones are, so that if there's anything that our antennas need to notice, we would at least have a schedule in front of us to be able to follow along.
Yes, we will share that with council.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've gone into a fair amount of detail on the demolition, but I've still missed it. When is the date that we project the entire existing high school building will be demolished under our new prospective arrangement here? And how does that differ from what we had expected prior to this renegotiation?
Is that a question to me or
anyone who knows the answer will be fine.
So what is clear in the terms that we have before us is that the trapezoid area will be cleared by May 29th. And then there'll be all due diligence to clear the rest of it. And in our discussions with the partnership, they don't want to just do a piece of it and mothball it. They want to do the whole thing at once. I think that's a point that we could probably put in the agreement. We haven't discussed it in that detail. So that's where we are on that topic. In terms of how long it takes to demolish a structure of this size, I would need to defer to the development team.
Okay, yeah, I mean, at least for my purposes, I think that's an important milestone for me. And it would be good, I think. I mean, we've talked about this in our meetings. There's costs associated with the, existence of an empty building, security, vandalism, et cetera, and there's a psychological cost too. I mean, I'd love to save this marriage. I'm I'm keen on hoping that we can do that. Understand we have to balance hope and risk. Like the fact that there is, as Ross pointed out, benefits down the roadways that are financial, like that. Like the fact that, apparently we're still committed to a true mixed-use community. That's the other very important thing to me. Understand that means that we are trying to do something that right here and right now the market may not be too keen on financing, but take you guys at your word that if you think by the end of March you're going to be able to come with announcements about office and senior and grocery, and that's great. I mean, that's good. But I would like, as a starting assurance of good faith, a very specific understanding of when the old high school will be removed completely, and then beyond that, I guess my only other question is, from where we sit here right now, does the end of March seem like a realistic time frame for making announcements in the areas that I mentioned? I don't want to create expectations that we can't meet. We built a certain amount of Black Swan event time into our schedule as it relates to the financial impact of this. And I always anticipated that we would use it up on something. I had no idea what it was, what it would be. But if we're going to, sort of hit the restart button, I just would like us to be realistic and aggressive, but realistic about whether, the first quarter of next year is going to, be able to deliver us what you say that you would like to be able to announce at the end of March.
So I'll take the first question. We are working on a detailed schedule for the demolition of the school. We have a general schedule, a high-level overview schedule already. We will make sure that the second we have something in the next few days or week, that we share that with Wyatt and get it to all of you. And that would show the way we intend to do the demo, how we quickly get the trapezoid area cleared, and then finish up the demo. So we'll get you that.
Okay, great.
And then as for the announcements, it varies by partner. So the grocery, for example, is open to allowing under an NDA certain members of the city or potentially some city council members to know who they are as part of their process for going the next step, but they're not open to a larger public announcement quite yet. So we can do that in the next, quite frankly, I think they want to do that in the next few weeks. And then the other partners, we are equally excited as you are to get those out in the public domain because, nothing builds momentum for a project than being able to make really great announcements. So we'll coordinate with the city as those what are currently signed letter of intents that we're negotiating purchase and sale agreements or partnership agreements. As those become executed agreements, our desire would also to announce those, and we can partner with the city on that to make sure it's kind of a maximum economic development effect.
Okay, just before I leave, the grocery, you said that they want to be able to make an announcement. What was that in reference to? Sort of the NDA process or a real?
No. Sorry. Yeah. So the grocery is the one that probably will not make it a public announcement until very close to their opening, unfortunately, or maybe while they're building out. But they are willing to allow a certain number of city leaders to, under an NDA, know who they are and have conversations with them. It's just the way they function and the way they work in the market. And so we're willing to, they've actually asked for us to work with the city to get a non-disclosure agreement executed so that they can have some conversations with the city in the next few weeks.
Okay. All right. Well, yes, thank you. That would be responsive to my two main concerns. Thanks then.
Yep.
Mr. Lichtenhouse and then Mr. Snyder.
Yeah. Wyatt, is there anything related to these changes to the comprehensive agreement that would materially change the phase 2 portion of the deal? I mean, other than economics that are flowing from this, is there anything else?
No, phase 2 has really not been subject to any of our discussions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. Let me just clarify a couple points because I think they've been a bit confused in the discussion. It's no great, wonderful thing that now the developer is saying they'll do the demolition. They were contractually obligated to do the demolition and apparently have indicated that they will not do that unless we agree to make additional financial sacrifices that significantly raise at least the near-term risk to the city financially. So the fact that part of this deal is that they'll do the demolition, they were contractually obligated to do the demolition before, and now are apparently only agreeing to go forward if we make major financial concessions. In other words, giving them gifts in order to have them comply with the original contract. Secondly, we have disagreed significantly with the legal basis and the claims that have given rise to their demands to renegotiate this contract. Finally, I personally have no confidence based upon the history of our dealing with this group that they'll actually perform in the future and at all, and certainly not with ironclad enforcement mechanisms. For example, a surety bond or something that will absolutely assure performance or find the equivalent financial payment to the city in the future. So that's where I am right now, and I'm unpersuaded by these promises in the future. We've heard them before. What we see is non-compliance with different justifications. Then we only can achieve compliance when we make additional financial sacrifices that increase the risk to the city and lower the risk to the developer. So my position is I haven't seen something yet that I would recommend that we agree with. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there other comments or questions from council? Okay, so just to be clear to all parties, council is not agreeing to anything tonight. This matter is coming to the public, and there's a public process that's been outlined. It may be also subject to additional public outreach, but at a minimum, we intend to do what was outlined earlier this evening. And a decision on this matter by council will be made at the January 11th meeting, Mr. Shields?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So unless there are any other comments or questions about this, then that is the process that we will follow. Our next public outreach will be on the 17th at noon. And Wyatt, are you also in the meantime going to be putting any information on our website?
Yeah, the PowerPoint that I've used tonight is now posted on the city website, and so the public can access that. And as I said earlier, it's been our model throughout this to be as to engage the public on every step of this project, and we're committed to continuing to do that on this as well as on the site plan, etc. And Falls Church Gateway Partners has always been part of those public discussions. So so that will be our plan going forward.
All right, so we look forward to any public comment or input or questions, and we will follow the process outlined this evening. Unless there's anything else on this matter, I would suggest we take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 9:41 and get on with the rest of the matters on this agenda. So let's go ahead and take a break here for 5 minutes. Again, reconvening at 9:41. Okay.
Before restarting.
All right. Well, let us know.
Okay, you are live and good to go.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome back to everyone. We are reconvening after a short break and moving on to additional business on the agenda, or maybe the first items on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the item, the next item, which I guess is the first item?
So was the city manager's report complete?
I don't know. Let's find out. I hope it was, but maybe it wasn't. Mr. Shields, are you back?
Well, I was asked for an update on COVID, and Mr. Carter is on the call. And Mr. Carter, could you give just a quick, kind of a very concise update on the governor's order and the vaccine rollout? These, if you're still on the call.
I am, Wyatt, and I will make it quick. So,
well, thank you for your patience and for joining us.
No problem. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of council. So starting out with the vaccination process, today Pfizer started moving their vaccinations to the different points of distribution, or pods, you might want to call them, around the United States. And they will be completed with that as of December 16th. Virginia will receive 480,000 vaccinations, which will they should be beginning to vaccinate on the 21st. Now, with things being flexible, that may change, but that is the date that we have been given, and the vaccinations will be for public health workers, frontline workers, and also long-term care facilities. And then from that point, they'll move on to other essential workers. So that's really good news. There is some anxiety that comes along with that because people do want some information on the vaccine. So with that said, the Virginia Department of Health will be hosting numerous community online conversations and also some virtual conversations. And so we are putting that out through our public information office to get as much information out to our residents as we can. As far as the city goes, our posture remains the same. We're continuously looking on how to improve with the governor's order. We are looking at changing some internal policy to make things a little bit more strict as far as inside city facilities with our employees. But externally, we continue to look at the numbers and follow the guidance of the Fairfax Health Department on best practices and what we should do there. So I tried to keep that as quick as I could to respect your time, but I will answer any specific questions that you have now.
All right. Well, first off, let us all thank you for the fine work you're doing here in the city and as a frontline worker in these difficult times, a first responder. We greatly appreciate you and the department's fine work on behalf of our community. Let me go ahead and open up, see if anyone has any questions or comments for you. Any comments from council? All right. Well, Wyatt, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Let me get myself. No. I do want to just thank Mr. Carter, who is our emergency operations director for the city, and he has been coordinating all of our response, and I'm very grateful for his service.
All right, we've got a couple hopefully brief questions. Ms. Hardy and then Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, Joe, I'll echo the thanks for putting in all this hard work during this really crazy time. I wanted to follow up on one of the comments we received, which is around testing. So while vaccines are in sight, hopefully late winter, early spring, we are still obviously in the throes of it, and with actually our numbers really looking bad compared to the spring. What other testing capacity changes are coming, or any more, I guess, is my question.
Really not anymore. I mean, they're looking at rapid tests. Obviously, that's become another a big, I guess you might want to say, testing process that they're doing. The problem with that is the reliability of those types of tests aren't what they should be. So I think they are continuously testing. They're looking at the neighborhoods and the areas where they're going to benefit from that the most. But really, there is nothing new coming along. You have antibody tests and stuff like that. But from this point forward, they're going to continue to test, but they're really going to focus on the distribution of the vaccine.
Because one of the concerns I think I still have is, since the spring, the rule has been you either have to have symptoms or have to been a known contact to get tested. And I think a lot of other states, rest of the country, have something called surveillance testing, which really helps kind of keep things from spreading. And I'm concerned that I guess across Virginia, we're not able to do that. But it sounds like from you, we're not really increasing capacity beyond what we have today.
No, unfortunately not.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Snyder?
Sure, just a quick question. Let's assume approval of the Moderna vaccine later this week by the FDA. Can you tell me about what the plans are for putting that out, the amounts, and how that'll be dealt with?
The amounts I don't know yet, Mr. Snyder. We haven't been given specifics on that, but we have been told that if we do get the Moderna vaccination, that would be for the phase 2 or 1A, 1B, which would be the other essential employees, which would be fire, police, and other businesses deemed essential. So those would go towards that type of those type of individuals. But we really haven't gotten any detailed information on that as of yet. But that is the information that we received today. If we do receive the Moderna vaccination right behind the Pfizer vaccination.
Okay, thank you. I'll be interested to hear the progress as well as how we're doing with vaccinations in the city of Falls Church. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, if not, I want to thank you again, Mr. Carter, and we again appreciate your fine work and your efforts, and look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you. We appreciate everyone's support as well. Have a good night.
You too. All right, Madam Clerk, let's move on finally to the business on the agenda.
Sure. Let's see. We have TO 20-25, ordinance to approve the sale of city-owned land known as the parking lot property on Park Place, RPC number 52-309-415 to Inside Property Group Incorporated, and authorize and direct the city manager to enter into an agreement of purchase and sale on terms and conditions set forth in the agreement of purchase and sale.
All right, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. This has been before council now, I think, at 3 work sessions, and has also already been referred to the Planning Commission, and they've rendered a positive recommendation for the sale of this parcel. It is associated with the Broad and Washington project that is being proposed by Insight Development. With this sale being referred out to boards, out really for the public's awareness, and then second reading scheduled on January 25th, the schedule would allow the City Council to consider the final sale of this agreement at second reading at the same time that the Council considers, gives final consideration to the land use applications for the Broad and Washington project. I won't go through the details of the transaction because we've reviewed those in several meetings previously, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, appreciate that. Mr. Shields, maybe just briefly, are there any changes that we should be aware of to the project?
There are no changes to this agreement. In terms of changes to the project itself, the council did have a work session discussion, and we did get direction from council on certain items, and we're now pursuing those with the developer, and I hope to have more to report on that in January, but I don't have an update at this point.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
I just want to note that we will still be working on some minor tweaks to the purchase and sale agreement. When we come back for second reading, to the extent there are any of those adjustments, we will let you all know exactly what they are.
All right, thank you very much. And let me just remind everyone, if you don't have If you're not speaking, please mute your voice on the computer. Mr. Snyder.
Sure. So at the last work session, I indicated at least 3 issues of importance. That a arrangement be made with the State Theater that makes them satisfied, that we do more on affordable housing with this project, and third, that there be some additional architectural changes to Lawton Street. I just want to put that back on the record. Those are 3 issues of importance that have been raised by various of our citizens. That's point number 1. Point number 2, it's important that because we may move forward on this today, does not mean or should not be read that points of concern expressed by any member of council are being waived by this. And this should not be interpreted as any kind of a relaxation on the part of the developer with regard to meeting those concerns. So I hope that that's generally understood. We're positioning this to be approved if we approve the SE, but in my view, there's certain things that have to be done before we give final approval to either of those. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. I was actually going to make the same comment as Mr. Snyder, so I will echo all those same 3 comments he mentioned on the application itself. If I may add a 4th, I think I've mentioned several times, I would love more assurances around the Whole Foods, whether that's commitment in the VC, stronger language, some sort of comparable revenue of a high-performing grocer, something along those lines. And then again, just because we were talking about this tonight doesn't mean that the developer is off the hook for those items. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We don't.
All right. Any additional comments, or do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to grant first reading to TO 20-25, schedule second reading and public hearing for January 25th, 2021, advertise the same according to law.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
And that's Ms. Hiscott on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Abstain.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0 with 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next item, please.
We have TO 20-26, ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify Chapter 48, Zoning, Article 2, Administration, Division 3, Amendments, Section 48-90, Special Exception, to edit the primary and secondary criteria to provide flexibility for smaller infill development by allowing consideration of projects that provide newer but not necessarily additional commercial development, and to specifically reference considerations of small area plan guidance, walkability, and streetscape.
Mr. Shields?
Well, thank you, Mayor. This item is before council for first reading and referral out to the boards and commissions, and specifically the EDA and the Planning Commission. Mr. Snyder, Jim Snyder, head of community development and community planning and economic development, is on the call and will speak to this item. I would just note that that kind of cutting to the chase of this item is to one, explicitly reference the city's area plans as a point of reference to be implemented in any special exception approvals. And then there are 2 major modifications to the primary criteria. And the first is to have one of the primary criteria, which currently reads that the resulting development will provide for significant net new commercial square footage, would be modified to read the resulting development provides for significant new or renovated commercial space and allows for, and then the language continues on unchanged. The change is to remove that hard requirement to have an increase in commercial space relative to what's on the site today. And it's further modified by item C, which is the resulting development produces substantial positive net new commercial revenue to the city. And that would be a modification from the current language that reads positive net new commercial and residential revenue to the city. With the words and residential, if you strike those out, it does make item C a harder standard and a clearer standard where you do now measure it relative to where we are today. So in a sense, those two primary criteria taken together make the square footage requirement a softer requirement for promoting new and refreshed commercial space being the criteria that's met, and now the hard requirement, and I say that in quotes, sort of the measurable new requirement is to have produced a net new commercial revenue to the city. So those are the substantive changes, and Mr. Snyder can provide us just with a little bit more context on those, but I wanted to sort of draw council's attention and the public's attention specifically to those key issues in the primary criteria. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Manager and Mr. Mayor and members of council. There was a lot of discussion about this at the recent work session, and there was concern that it was too loose, and so these modifications that have been made that the manager went through to make sure that we're talking about some substantial, valuable commercial or renovation of commercial property would be one of the criteria that would be retained. Again, getting rid of the net word, I think gives council more flexibility to evaluate projects on their value and what they actually contribute versus a square footage number, which may or may not really be that useful, given we have properties that have old properties with a lot of square footage but may not have much value. So I think this has been responsive to some of the concerns we heard at the work session, and if it can move forward to Planning Commission and Economic Development, they will also, and others, they will also be able to provide their input and perhaps fine-tuning on this. So I think it is worthwhile to move this along. Again, it's been modernized to reflect our planning values, and we did, I think, make some good changes from the work session recently.
Okay, comments? Questions? Let me go ahead. We've got Vice Mayor Connolly and Mr. Snyder.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. In the beginning of somewhere in here, we talk about wanting for smaller infill development. Is there anything in the ordinance that says the specific size, a maximum size on the properties that we're thinking about, or any way to say a site that isn't a combined parcel?
I don't believe we have a specific site size in this version, Mr. Manager. That's correct. We have had smaller projects which have had difficulty meeting the additional square footage. In some cases, they had very poor, not very valuable square footage. And so that was one of the reasons for getting rid of the net language in the code. And also, the small area plans also do give examples of where smaller scale infill can happen within the small area plans. So they provide some guidance as to urban design and other such features.
I guess my concern is that as we are trying to fix a problem that exists for smaller properties, we may be coming up with some unintended consequences for the larger properties. For example, what would this ordinance, this change, how would it have affected the Insight property? Would that have affected anything that they presented to us?
Well, I think in terms of the Insight project, you have a number of older commercial buildings which add up to a fair amount of square footage. But in terms of their value and the revenue they'll produce for the city is going to be a lot less than what a new development with new commercial uses and new construction will provide. In reality, there's a fair amount of square footage presently on the Insight property. It's just not worth much, and it's not configured in a manner that it has much future in terms of modern use of commercial land,
right,
or buildings rather. So it actually would help you, I think, with the Insight property, in that you're looking at the whole package. What's the value of the commercial that's being proposed? What are the projected revenues of the uses that are part of that specifically designed space? And so I think it does have a positive effect on something like the Insight project, where square footage net, the amount of additional square footage is a little bit problematic.
But would it have given us a better project, or would it have helped the developer present a better project to start out with? Or would it just have been part of the negotiations along the way?
It helps you in the sense of, I don't know that it would have changed things necessarily, but in terms of meeting the primary criteria, and you're able to look at all the things that are being proposed, so that something like the support for the creative cauldron, the other improvements on the project, pedestrian improvements, transportation improvements, there are a whole variety of pluses on a project like that, which are part of the calculus that the council uses to decide whether or not it's appropriate. But in terms of the square footage game, there's a lot of square footage there presently. It's just not terribly valuable. So this, I think, does make that less of a problem, and gives you more flexibility to look at the other items on the list of things you can consider.
Okay. I think because this is first reading, so before we get to second reading, I just need to do a deeper dive into what those unexpected consequences may be. So thanks.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so I think there's an issue with the title of this ordinance, because it talks about infill development, but the actual scope of the ordinance isn't limited to infill development. So I think we need to correct that if we're going to go forward, because I think a typical citizen reading the title would not understand that the changes are really across the board for all potential SE projects. So that's point number one. I think we want to be very clear that the implication of this is far broader than the infill projects, unless we're going to limit it to infill projects, in which case we should define them. Secondly, I would not agree to B without C. And I sincerely hope that if B remains in, that C remains in its revised version. I did want to ask a question. I would like to make it clear that all the primary criteria have to be met for a project. And I'm trying to figure out if that has been the practice, number one, and number two, whether we shouldn't have some language clarifying that around line 184 and 185.
And just to respond to your first question, I don't think there's ever been a special exception that did not solidly meet both primary criteria, with all the primary criteria. The Insight project, I will note, and it's in the staff report for that project, that it runs right up against the new square footage. Commercial square footage is, I think, right at the existing square footage. And so staff has had a difficulty with that. It's, the Broad and Washington project does not provide a significant net new square footage. It produces about the same. Mm-hmm. However, it does produce significantly higher commercial revenue. Right. And so in some respects, it's a case where this language would be better tailored to that type of a project. That's the only instance that I can think of where we've been kind of right at a primary criteria as opposed to really quite solidly exceeding it.
So let me just follow up, Mr. Mayor. I would hope that we could say in line 185, compliance with all of the primary criteria. I don't want a situation where there's some ambiguity here where you can comply with B and not C, or A and not B and C. So I think we need to tighten that up a little bit. I don't want to engage in wordsmith. Well, I guess we have to tonight, but so I would say on line 183, compliance with all of the primary criteria are essential. And hopefully that could be part of the ordinance moving forward. And again, I think that's been our intent, but it's not entirely clear when you read the language on its face. And secondly, I think there is an issue with the title of this ordinance that we need to clarify, at least going forward, that it is much broader than infill developments. Those would be my comments. Thanks very much. I am certainly anxious to move these forward in its current proposed language. Thank you. With that one addition, making clear that we're talking about all the essential, all the primary criteria. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say much more than what I've said in past meetings, but I do firmly believe that these changes are necessary for the type of development that we'd like to see in the future. I think it's important for us to not be faced with making approval decisions on really nothing but primarily large projects, 3, 4, 5 acre plus. I will agree with Councilman Snyder if there is language that wants to be included that focuses on infill. I don't want to necessarily be so prescriptive to where it makes where it makes this process more difficult than it already is. But that is the intent here, is to incentivize and be a little more prescriptive in terms of infill development, which is what we want. And I do think that it's important for us to recognize the fact that for this type of infill development, in some cases, forcing more commercial than otherwise should be on a particular site, in some cases begets and leads to denser projects with more residential to offset the economics of it, because I think it's going to be this way for into the foreseeable future, that the residential value is going to be greater than the commercial values. And so giving us this flexibility could potentially lead to less dense projects, which again, I think is much more fitting and is certainly appropriate for the infill project. So I personally would like to see this move forward as it stands, and have Planning Commission weigh in on it, and other boards and commissions weigh in on it to give us their thoughts, because there's some really good history there with a number of those folks that have spent much more time, I think, than even some of us around the special exception process. But Jim, I want to thank you guys and staff for working really, really hard on this to get this out of EDC and to get something in front of us. I think that puts us in a good position to be able to make some decisions and see some more interesting projects that will help revitalize areas of the city that otherwise would probably sit fairly fallow. So that's all I got. I'd like to see this move forward, but I know other folks have questions. So thank you.
Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. Yes, I won't also belabor previous comments. I think I am comfortable with it as is. I did want to follow up with a question to the city attorney. So last week, I think she had concerns whether there was enough specificity based on any concerns with legal risk if we have projects coming through. With the new language that's been edited since last week, Ms. McCoskey, are you more comfortable with it now?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I don't think there have been any edits since last week. I think this is the same language that came to you last week.
I think small area
happened that I'm not aware of, but my understanding is this is the same language. I remain concerned about criteria B because my view is that, and it's not about what is trying to be accomplished, because and I've had a difficulty trying to figure out exactly what it is we want to accomplish on that language, or with that language, but whichever way we want to go, if we want to loosen things up, that's fine. But right now, my concern is simply that I don't think this tells us, or this provides enough information to know what would be allowed or what wouldn't be allowed. And what it won't give is council the ability to turn a project down for failure to meet this standard because it's not definitive enough. That's my concern, and I remain concerned about that. And maybe as it goes through the process, we can talk about those things. But this is the same language, I believe, that was before you last week.
Mr. Sider and Mr. Shields, I thought the blue line, I guess, which we're now looking at, that's been changed, right? So the adding it, we took out net.
There was concern. There was concern last week about this not having commercial and not referencing commercial, and Wyatt, that has been changed to put that back in, I believe, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Mm-hmm.
And so there could be, Carol, I think there's really an economic analysis of that. You're able to look at what's the value of the commercial space that's being built and renovated, and that gives you a yardstick by which to measure the significance of a project. If it doesn't do much economically, then it's not significant. So I think these changes, they're subtle changes, but I believe they were made, and they were trying to address some of your concerns.
I'll have to look back, but I believe this is exactly what was presented last time, and no changes have been made.
All right, well, you're considering that. Any other questions, Ms. Hardy?
Yeah, well, just one final comment. So going back to Insight, Mr. Shields, I think I heard you say that as proposed, it barely meets criteria B. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I guess it's worth commenting that, given that it's kind of our most immediate and biggest project right now in front of us, with the way SE is written, we actually have trouble with a project that obviously brings a ton of benefits to the city and significant fiscal yield that actually has trouble meeting that. And I think the timing is really important. So besides all the benefits we've talked about in the past about wanting to do more infill and have more flexibility and have more things come through the pipeline, I think timing to kind of give council the flexibility and be able to adapt to kind of that post-COVID environment is important. So I want to make sure that we kind of keep that in mind as how can we remain nimble in the face of kind of obviously a changing economic development environment. So I would support this as it stands and let it go through the board and commission process.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I would too. Two questions. One, Jim, the small area plans and the work that they do to identify properties that might be subject to redevelopment with the language that we're considering here. What's your assessment of, the success, the breadth of those small area plans and sort of laying out to somebody who might move into town and wonder, gee, I'd like to buy a house somewhere in Falls Church. I wonder what this neighborhood is thinking of being, over the 30 years that I'm going to live here. Do we feel like the small area plans give enough guidance and the zoning underlying them that folks would not be surprised if an infill project were to be brought in proximity to their, say, single-family home?
I believe they do. I think actually you can go back many years when the opportunity areas were established, and essentially City Council drew bright lines of these are the areas that are going to be there. They have an opportunity for redevelopment, revitalization. Here's where we're going to have those things happen. So I think, that's a wonderful place to start from. And the small area plans have stayed within those boundary lines. And so I think we're finding that developers and others are looking at them and as our citizens and saying, okay, here's what we understand is going to go in these limited areas in the city. It's not all that much acreage when you get down to it, but we are going to have development in these areas, and we're going to preserve the residential areas on our edges. Recently, we've been doing some design things, which we're going to be sharing with the Planning Commission about ways to have transitions from neighborhood areas to commercial, how those lines are designed so that it's clear that, this is the residential area and that's the revitalization area. I think the plans do a good job. They're very specific, and if you bother to look at them, there's a lot of detail about how they ought to look, the urban design, the streetscape, et cetera. So I may be biased, but I think we have excellent small area plans that give good guidance. They provide guidance without being so restrictive that there isn't flexibility for the council and others to interpret what ought to happen on those sites.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, that's one reason I'd like this to get into the Planning Commission orbit, because I feel like they're well equipped, better equipped than we are to, make the connection. I mean, it's important to me, at least, that we do have a communication channel open to the community that lets folks know they should not be shocked if they are, living in fairly close proximity to one of our corridor streets, or even a secondary street, that, change is coming. It may not be next month, it may not be next year, it may not be 10 years from now, but Falls Church is going to change and adapt in the next generation in ways that I think are in alignment with the way it has changed and adapted in the last 25 years. And I would just like this to get that conversation, activated and grounded in small area plans and zoning. My second question, I guess, I'm not quite sure how to square what Mary Beth asked and what Dave Snyder asked, but in terms of the title of the legislation, I would not have any problem just dropping the word smaller. I mean, it seems to me like what we are aiming to do, as was pointed out with the Inside example, is to promote good infill development wherever it is. I mean, I'm a strong believer that, we should be able to do smaller projects, so I'm for that, particularly smaller condominium projects. But I don't want to preclude that a project like Insight, which, as Ms. Hardy said, has some fine qualities, could also be considered under this rubric. So I don't know if I can, make a motion that will be successful that does not include the word smaller, or if we should just, move it ahead as it is now and have that be something that we talk about a little down the line. But I can go either way.
All right, other questions or comments? I guess I've got a few. I mean, one, I do think the problem that's been identified is smaller infill. And this goes back to Vice Mayor Connolly and Mr. Snyder's comments. Yet the solution, quote unquote, applies throughout the city. Is that a problem? I don't know. I really haven't fully thought out all the different permutations of how that might or might not be an issue. I guess for me, my ultimate goal would to have a more balanced tax base, to ensure that going forward that we don't lose sight of commercial uses, even though they may be a little out of vogue, just like we've done at the 10 acres, to insist that even though it might not be the best financial model for developers, that we still have a mix of uses in our downtown. And so I think we have to push for that. If we don't, the most profitable use, I guarantee you, in every square inch of our downtown is multifamily residential. And the only way we're not going to get multifamily residential is if we insist through either the language of ordinance or just in some other means that we don't have multifamily residential on every inch of our downtown. And so I think we need to be cognizant of that, of where the market is, and cognizant of maybe what our goal is. And at least for mine, it's to have a more balanced tax base than we have right now. And so I do have concerns changing this ordinance about unintended consequences, or how this issue with trying to accommodate the small lot that has the old rundown house on it, how that gets redeveloped, but what the implications might be for the 4-acre site somewhere else down the pike, and whether our hands either get tied or constrained in some fashion but what we're doing tonight. And so I guess I'm just reiterating my concerns and desires to make sure that what we do is fully thought out, because this is one of the most important things, the development and redevelopment of downtown, at least to my mind, that we as a council have done and will do going forward. So I do have some trepidation about what's being considered now, and I'm not sure how, frankly, to address it. But anyway, I want to make note of that. So, Mr. Snyder?
Sure. So let me follow up on Councilmember Duncan's suggestion, and just to move things along. I move on first reading TO 20-26 with 2 amendments: deletion of the reference to small. Where is it? Deletion of the reference for smaller infill development in the title, and the addition of, on line 183, compliance with all of before the primary criteria are essential to the character and well-being of the city.
So you want to delete that? I thought you wanted to
add.
Oh, add, okay.
Add the phrase compliance with all of before it would be at the beginning of the sentence. So it would read compliance with all of the primary criteria are essential to the character and well-being of the city, whereas the secondary criteria are discretionary in nature.
Okay. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
All right. So we have a motion and a second by Mr. Duncan. So is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
No.
Okay, so no one said to comment on this. All right, so do we want to take a vote now? Does anyone want to comment on that, or just go ahead and move to a vote? All right, let's go to a vote then. And keeping in mind, presumably this language can change during the pendency before this comes to second reading. Is that correct, Ms. McCroskey?
Yes, within some limits.
Okay. All right. So, Madam Clerk, will you call roll now?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy's got a comment.
Sorry, I had a question. Is this similar to our budget votes where between first and second reading, the ordinance can get more narrow but can't get more broad?
The ordinance can change as long as it is sort of between what was originally there and what was advertised. So that's sort of considered to be within the scope of advertising. So with a budget, it's easy because it's numbers, and you just have to look at the specifics of each one. But we could do something narrower from something between what existed in the beginning and what had been advertised. And we can figure that out as we go along and try to work within that.
Carol, let me ask another clarifying question to Dave Snyder's recommendation for adding language to 183. I don't necessarily have an issue with it, but I'm not necessarily good with it simply because of what you just stated about not getting any broader. If we have further discussion and find out that by having a requirement, or if it's being looked at as a requirement that all 3 of those primary criteria are met, letter of the law, are we setting ourselves up for an issue specifically to what Wyatt just described for Broad and Washington? Meaning, if we find out that
Well, as far as advertising goes, since currently those words aren't in there, you could again drop them out if you needed to in the end. because you can go between what is there today, which is simply that they're essential to the character and well-being. And today we don't have the words about the compliance. So I think you can make adjustments to compliance with all of the criteria before adoption.
Okay, and tell me again, what's the language being proposed for 183?
It was compliance with all of the primary criteria are essential to the character and well-being of the city. And I will say the one thing that I have also noted in the past, but doesn't, is that item D is not really a criteria. It's really a separate provision. So I would just make that a new paragraph. And then the primary criteria would be A, B, and C.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have a process question. The recommendation is to refer this item out and schedule the public hearing for February 16th, 2021. I don't know if that was part of the motion, but I would need some guidance for that.
What, does it need to be in the motion? I don't think it does it?
It doesn't, but I would like the guidance.
All right, I think you could.
Referring it, and
I suspect that Mr. Snyder and Mr. Duncan intend for it to be referred out. I presume at that schedule or something close to that schedule.
Okay.
Unless you have anything else to say, either one of you all.
Well, if the motion is to review and recommend the city council schedule second reading and public hearing for February 16th, 2021, and advertise the same according to law, that would be what I would second. And refer
Mr. Snyder.
And refer to the Planning Commission and the Economic Development Authority.
All right, Mr. Snyder, is that your intent with the motion?
Yeah, with the two amendments that we've talked about before. One, deleting the limitation to smaller infill development in the title and adding the language on, what is it, line 183.
Got it.
As to the attorney's point about a paragraph or another, subsection, if that needs to be part of the motion, I guess it could be, or
It does not. That's certainly something we can adjust as we move through. That would not be outside of the scope of advertising.
legislative draftsmanship can occur on that as far as I'm concerned.
I would also say, to the extent this moves forward, is that it sounds like it needs cleanup and some additional consideration, just as we're discussing right now. And I would suggest maybe sooner as opposed to later, some thought be given to that, so that this doesn't get far down the pike and we have to, make some additional changes we weren't contemplating.
Yeah. Susan Bell was going to do a lot of the work on this, and then she's had a family emergency, so that's made it difficult there because she hasn't been able to put in the time on it.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we want to go ahead and move to a vote then? Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder.
Yeah.
Mayor Charter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's keep moving. What's next? The budget?
TR 20-48, resolution providing guidance on the development of the FY 2022 budget.
All right, Mr. Shields or Ms. Bawa?
Well, thank you, Mayor. We were planning to do just a summary of the presentation that was given at work session last week, but given the late hour, we'll do it if requested, but we won't launch it unless it is requested.
You'll do it, but you won't like it?
We'll only do it if people beg for it. And so, one of the key things that Ms. Bawa did present in terms of the revenue forecast, she went through all of the details of all the different revenue sources and came to a number of a projected 2.5% increase in revenues as a planning number for FY22, and that generates approximately $2 million of new revenue for the city. So within that construct, and we know that these are early projections, and the council did ask for a range, and it is difficult to do. It's hard to plan with a range. Usually with department directors, I give them lots of caveats, but I tell them sort of this is the target as best we can discern it right now. Whereas a range, people don't know how to deal with a range. And so that's why we typically at this point, we give a number, but we just frankly acknowledge that so much is still unknown, and particularly so in this fiscal year with all the things that we're dealing with. I will just hit some of the highlights in the budget guidance document. At line 98, one of the things that it just states up front, as requested by the council, is to acknowledge the incredible uncertainty that we have in this moment in time, with the pandemic still raging across the country. And so we acknowledge up front that there will be major changes possibly in the economic health of the city, the needs of our community, particularly as the CARES funding runs out, whether there will be federal assistance, whether Congress will pass further CARES 2 or something like that. These are all unknown at this point, and so we just state that up front, and we commit to staying in close contact with the council and with the larger community about changes as soon as we know them. So some of the key items in the budget guidance, we did keep at the council's request at line 22, the direction that general fund operating budget, inclusive of both general government and school operations, should not exceed organic tax revenue growth, which is currently projected, as I stated earlier, at 2.5% over last year's budget, over the current year's budget. We've added the bullet to continue and maintain the spirit of cooperation and collaboration between general government and schools in the development of annual budget and capital planning, and I can tell you that is happening. We're sharing information and I think working well together. At line 132, there is a call for being careful and conservative, if you will, in a revenue forecast, given all the uncertainty that we've acknowledged up front. Some of the things that have been, I'll hit the changes. Propose a budget that promotes racial and socioeconomic equity. This is at line 155 in the allocation of the public's dollars. This is a key part of the council's work plan for this year, and a key part of staff commitment as well. And we want to work together to try to advance that and improve in that area. Those are, I think, the main changes from prior years. Other kind of key themes that still remain and will remain really important issues for this year's budget, providing options for funding affordable housing, providing options for funding improvements to the city's stormwater infrastructure. We talked a lot about that with the Stormwater Task Force recommendations last fall, and the plan to deliver meaningful capital improvements that will improve the resiliency and protect property. The commitment to maintain our funding for our downtown business districts, to keep them vibrant, attractive, and walkable. Options for funding and delivery of the neighborhood traffic calming program. The council has taken big strides in that in terms of sustainable funding for that, as well as for the sidewalk program. So those are built into the FY 21 budget, and so the direction here is to carry those forward and possibly enhance those next years if we're able to. Present a budget that provides employee compensation that is competitive within the regional labor market. That is something that we need to do, and we don't want to fall behind on. It's very difficult to catch back up if you do fall behind in that area. So those are, I think, some of the key areas, and I'd be happy to, we do have Ms. Bawa here on the call, and she always takes the lead in our staff work on the budget, and I'm very grateful to her for that and for her really deft and thoughtful management of the city's finances, particularly in these uncertain times. So let me stop there, and we can both answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go. We've got, looks like a comment here. Let me see who this is. Ms. Hardy, do you want to start off?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, it's really a comment, not a question. I just wanted to note that as we look at kind of what the region is facing, having 2.5% revenue growth is actually quite remarkable. So I do appreciate, Mr. Shields, the addition of kind of adding in that scenario planning because of all the unknowns in case the numbers do end up looking different on the plus or the minus side. We should kind of keep that in mind. So I appreciate that add as well as the equity angle that's called out in there. But otherwise, I agree it's appropriately prudent to go into the budget to start conservative and then hopefully go up from there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions? Ms. Conley, Vice Mayor Conley, and then Mr. Duncan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Shields, thank you for this budget guidance statement. I think your first paragraph, you did a really nice job of laying out the situation that we talked about last week in a way that is understandable and makes a lot of sense. I agree with Ms. Hardy that it's good to start conservatively and hopefully build from there. In this budget guidance statement is the same inherent conflict that we have every single solitary year, which is that we say we want to have excellent school programs and we want to make sure that we are paying our employees salaries that are comparable to the region, and sometimes that is impossible with a 2.5% increase. So that's the tension that we know we're going to face. And I just want to make sure that as we go forward, we're aware of that some of those needs may be more than the 2.5%. And what are the things that we can, what are the priorities? I mean, I guess that's the whole budget process, is we're trying to find the priorities. And is the priority paying our employees more? Is the priority one of the other things, because they're all really important. And I know it is just going to be a tough year going ahead. So we'll see what happens. But I wish that we could project more than a 2.5%, but can't do that. And I really do want to make sure we keep our eye on what the city's programs and priorities are and not cut them in a way that is damaging just because we're trying to stay within that 2.5%.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duncan.
Well said. Yes, tough year it will be. I'm looking through here. Why the mention of whatever our plans are going to be on raising the stormwater fee? I know we talked about that last week. Remind me of the details. Is the start of that going to be built in likely to your budget proposal?
Well, we do. First, let me acknowledge there will be more council discussion of this. What we had laid out back in the fall was if we were to move forward with the construction of the projects that are currently under engineering, we would need if I recall correctly, a 10% increase in the fee next year, and then subsequent increases after that. And so that is the sort of the planning piece, but we do still have more information that's going to come to bear. I think with that engineering, we'll have more refined cost numbers. We might have some new options. The council also directed for options on green infrastructure, and the Stormwater Task Force will be reconvening in January to work through recommendations on that. Those have a price tag as well. So that's essentially where that stands at the moment.
Okay, well, I guess, if I don't ask for a specific reference to it in this, just as an acknowledgement that it's a pretty big thing that, this is going to be probably year one of whatever campaign we're going to conduct over the next several years. But if I don't ask for specific language, perhaps all this work that will come about during the winter will yield a price tag that's less expensive than I fear. So maybe I should be careful what I ask for. I just want folks to know that, that is in the same way that assessments going up are a built-in tax increase without us doing anything if we keep the tax rate level. So too are increases in the stormwater fee have an impact on residential and commercial property owners. So as long as we're all aware of that and we're talking about it through the winter, I guess that's sufficient.
All right, thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Thanks. I think the document does address the concerns that were raised. So I'd like to support it. I do have a budgetary question for the schools since we're talking about budget tonight. I'm interested in a report on the total direct and indirect costs relating to name change.
Did you hear that, Ms. Bawa? I think it was, you want to repeat the last bit, Dave?
Sure. I would like to direct to the schools and ask for an accounting of all the costs relating to the name change, direct and indirect costs. Thank you.
Sure, we'll do that.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah, I want to tag on to what Phil had just mentioned. I mean, it's been an extraordinarily difficult year for not just the businesses and the employees, but also the residents. And as we've mentioned here, there are going to continue to be increased costs, whether it's assessments on houses, stormwater fees. I'd like to find a way, if possible, for us to offset some of those costs for parents who've been not only trying to keep up with jobs virtually, but teach kids part-time virtually, and having to deal with other financial burdens and distress. So if there's a way for us to help lower some of that burden, if it's offsetting tax rate for increases in assessment, or looking for other ways to mitigate increasing costs on our residents, I feel like we've done a really good job of looking for other ways to support our businesses and our employees financially over the last year, and I think it's appropriate and time for us to do the same for the taxpayers, which fund all of this to begin with. Otherwise, I'm good with this.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions? All right, so is there any public comment related to this matter, Ms. Heath?
There is not.
All right. Do we need a motion here? I guess we do. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TR 20-48.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Ms. Hardy on the second. Madam Clerk, will you go ahead and call the roll vote?
Sure. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to the consent items. Mr. Shields?
Do you want me to read them all out, or they're just acknowledge that I did, in putting this agenda together, just in light of how late meetings have been going and knowing how time consuming the other items would be, we did push a lot of things onto consent this week.
So I guess I would just say one or two things. One, could I ask whether the legislative agenda has any with vaping in there? And if not, might we consider adding something?
Mayor Tarter, the legislative program does not include vaping. There's smoking in parks, but is specifically to publicly owned land and parks. So in consultation with the city attorney just prior to this meeting, knowing the Girl Scouts position that they would be asking, if council wishes to add that, we would recommend you remove it from consent and do that as a separate motion with an amendment.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else here of note? Wyatt? I mean, have people looked over the consent agenda? Does anyone have anything they want to pull off of this and have additional conversations on?
I don't need conversation, Wyatt, but given all the discussions we've had about the Amazon Reach grant application, I thought it would be helpful for you to just provide an update on the projects for the public. I know there's a lot of community attention on it too.
I'd be happy to, and in fact, I would defer to Cindy Mester, who could give us that update most accurately.
Thank you, Council Mr. Shields. We still have the two proposals under consideration as outlined in the staff report. One is the home ownership expansion, working with a nonprofit to acquire houses, rehab, and resell at an affordable price using Virginia housing financing tools. And also the second one for rental preservation by extending an existing covenant for an additional 10 years, which is the property selected is the one that's first to expire. Both of these are within the $3.7 million that's available through year 2 of Amazon Reach funding. We will be able to apply for and actively looking at program options for years 3 through 5. I will note that we've had a preliminary review of the concept plans by Virginia Housing, and tomorrow HHS and I will be meeting with them to seek that feedback so then we could enhance the application that then we'll draft and due December 31st. Officially today, we received a letter from the EDA in support of the grant application. The resolution before council tonight would be support, and I'm aware that the Housing Commission is finalizing a support letter as well. And then I'm coordinating as an outcome of council input and Ms. Hardy in particular's comments last meeting to solicit individuals who are definitely interested in supporting, as well as the Northern Virginia Alliance for Affordable Housing.
All right, thank you. So do folks have other questions about that? If not, might I suggest we pull the legislative item off the consent agenda and have a motion with all the remaining items?
I would move to take that off the legislative package off the consent agenda and take it up separately.
Okay. And do we have a motion to actually approve the other items?
I move the consent agenda.
Consent items.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion by Ms. Hardy to approve the consent agenda. Who was the second?
Debbie Hiscott.
Okay. So Madam Clerk, will you go ahead and call this vote?
Yes, Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right. So we have the legislative agenda, which is off the consent agenda, with the notion that we could put something in about vaping, our support to restrict or prohibit vaping here in Falls Church. Do we have, I don't know what kind of direction you need, Mr. Shields, from us. Does it need to be highly specific, or can you guys just sort of get the general tone of what would likely be something that would be in the realm of possibility and try to work with that?
Well, I understood the request to be to have the authority to regulate using the police powers and our zoning powers to the location of vaping stores within a certain radius of school areas. And we could work through the details of that. I would bet that there is legislation that some are proposing along those lines, and we could add that to the legislative program.
What do folks think of that?
I'd support that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So do we have a motion regarding that?
So Snyder, do I try it? And I move approval TR 20-46, which is to adopt the City of Falls Church 2021 legislative program with the addition of a provision requesting authority to use the city's police power to regulate the location of vaping operations.
All right. I think that was a good job, Mr. Snyder. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Madam Clerk?
Before we get to the roll call, I just wanted to make a comment while we're waiting for Celeste anyway. Last week we talked about sovereign immunity or qualified immunity, and I think I had asked for just more research before I kind of understand our position and support it. I don't know whether that's done before this or whether the legislative committee had a chance to discuss.
If I may, on behalf of the legislative committee, I'll do a quick synopsis, and then we did have a good discussion on that and would welcome the committee's members' input. We did, or I did a little bit more research and determined that localities like Fairfax and Arlington did not have anything specific to sovereign immunity. I did go back to the work of the ML, which does have sovereign immunity included in their adopted position, which council was active in, and we are incorporating by reference. And in particular, speaking to maintaining the or supporting maintaining the existing legislation and code authority and not diluting it. The discussion was that we do maintain strong and high standards. And so the ask from the legislative committee, and I'm on line 480, would to add and reinforce the council's commitment, both internally and externally, to high standards of our public safety through the task force, the one that council has chartered, as well as the one that the chief has internally stood up. And so instead of objecting or opposing any legislation, the position on line 489 speaks to support and maintaining qualified and sovereign immunity status. And this is because of the financial and risk insurance liability if that was diluted in our consideration. So that's a synopsis of a robust discussion that the legislative committee had. So I'll defer to them for any additional comments.
So Dave Snyder, council member, party. So I think we felt that in view of strong work by the city previously and our police review commission, that the best way to address police issues is through proactive approaches that way rather than litigation after the fact. And when you start waiving sovereign immunity, you end up exposing the city to significant additional liability and costs. And we just felt that we wanted to reiterate our commitment to addressing the real issue rather than I know other council members feel free to add.
Well said.
Okay, so Celeste, are you ready for the vote on the legislative package or the legislative?
I am.
Okay, go ahead and do that then.
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Mrs. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder.
He's speaking through beeps now. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like R2D2.
Was that a yes?
Yeah. People would wish I was born with a mute button, but anyway.
we can work on that.
Yeah, sure.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
And the motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Could you reach out to the Girl Scouts and let them know we changed our legislative package based on their input?
Sure.
All right, let's keep on going. Business not on the agenda, standing, regional committee, and council liaison reports. What do we have? All right. How about any council member comments?
Wyatt, I wonder if you had any luck finding out about the firearms signs and when they're going to come online in the parks.
Councilmember Duncan, I beg your pardon. I'll need to get that word to council tomorrow. I don't have that update.
Okay, thanks. Since it's our last meeting, I just wanted to put it in there.
All right. Any other council member comments?
I have one, Mayor Turner.
Yes, of course.
that is, and this is sort of from the Government Operations Committee, but also from the whole council. We've been working on the council work plan and sharing the council work plan with boards and commissions as well as staff liaisons, and asking everyone to work on specific projects related to council priorities, which include looking at things through an equity lens, all the policies that we're working on, as well as just being aware of what the council priorities are. So council is working on a letter that's going to go out to all of the boards and commissions with a charge for 2021. And we're asking all of our boards and commissions to work with us in the important work of the city so that we can all succeed and get more stuff done. So I'm asking staff liaisons and council committee chairs to be on the lookout for that letter. It should be coming either the end of December or the beginning of January as you plan your agendas for the coming year.
All right, thank you. Other council member comments?
Mr. Mayor Snyder, two things. First, I want folks to know that I've already made public comments opposing some of the proposed metro cuts, including closing the East Falls Church Station. We'll be submitting formal comments. Deputy Manager Cindy Mester and I will work on these and provide drafts to the City Council. But I want folks to be aware that we are focused on this issue. We are engaged. We don't like what we saw. We realize that there are difficult financial issues that have to be addressed. But the way that they're proposing addressing them in terms of major cuts to bus lines that serve essential folks and frankly, the larger communities, as well as shutting down the East Falls Church Station, we are protesting those and will continue to do that. And we'll certainly keep council advised as we go forward. And a comment I fully support Vice Mayor Connolly's initiative with Councilmember Letty Hardy on working with the boards and commissions. The only hope is that we apply the equity lens, but we also don't lose sight of the other priorities that the boards and commissions have to do, because they do critical work, everything from traffic calming to critical environmental proposals. But anything that just kind of clarifies that would be great from my standpoint. But I think it's a great initiative, and I want to thank those two council members for working on it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duncan.
I should have reported on behalf of my colleagues from the Economic Development Committee that we met Friday and heard a presentation from Federal Realty about the multi-million-dollar upgrade that they're going to carry out next year on the East and West Falls Plaza shopping centers. There's been some press coverage of that already, you may have seen. And we also heard a presentation, just sort of high-level first presentation from the Atlantic Realty folks for a project at the corner of South Washington, West Broad, and South Maple that will be, we believe, presented in the early part of next year. So something to look forward to. Two pieces of good news of business communities continuing optimism about Falls Church's potential.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duncan, and thank you for your leadership on that committee. Any last words before we adjourn for 2020? So anyway, it's been a crazy year, that's for sure, and a lot going on. But hopefully next year will be a better year. But a lot of hard work, I think, throughout our city, from our police and from our public works folks to teachers to everybody. It's been one heck of a year, but it looks like better days are ahead of us. So anyway, thank you all for the great work you on council have done, and Mr. Shields and Ms. Mester and the rest of senior staff. We greatly appreciate all the hard work you've done as well, and wish everyone a happy new year and happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
All right. Here, here. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, council.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good night.
Good night.